I know hopeless romantic sounds naive to some people, like it means you don't understand how the world works, but that's not true. A hopeless romantic isn't someone who ignores reality. It's someone who sees it clearly and still chooses love anyway. It's knowing how badly love can hurt and still believing it's worth it. I don't believe in love because I think it's easy. I believe in it because I know how rare it is when it's real. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't just want someone, you want connection. You want the kind of love where attention doesn't wander, where effort isn't forced, where choosing each other feels natural, not strategic. You want late night talks that don't feel rushed, silence that feels comfortable. Inside jokes no one else understands. You want to build a world with one person and let the rest fade into the background? And yeah, you know the risk. You know love can leave scars. You know it can change you. You know it can take pieces of you that don't come back the same. But being a hopeless romantic means you'd rather feel deeply than live safely. You don't want love that's casual. You don't want to act detached. You don't want to pretend you wouldn't be devastated to lose someone you care about. You want to care. You want to choose someone fully and mean it. No exits, no backups, no pretending you're less invested than you are. And that's what makes it hard sometimes, because the world rewards indifference. It praises being unbothered. It treats emotional distance like maturity. So when you show up soft, present, intentional, people call you too much, but you're not too much. You're just not built for shallow love. A hopeless romantic doesn't love this way because they're weak. They love this way because they're brave enough to risk being hurt for something that actually matters. You're not chasing a fantasy. You're chasing alignment, the kind of love that feels steady, not chaotic, intense but safe, deep but mutual. And even if it takes longer, even if you have to wait, even if you get hurt along the way, you don't regret loving like this, because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. So no, you won't grow out of it. You won't harden. You won't stop wanting something real. You're a hopeless romantic because you refuse to let the world convince you that love should be shallow, casual, or disposable. And one day, someone will meet you in that same place. They won't laugh at your softness. They won't flinch at your depth. They won't ask you to tone it down. They'll recognize it, and that's when you'll realize you were never hopeless. You were just holding out for something worth believing in. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you believe love will save you. It means you believe it's worth showing up for. It means you don't enter connections casually. You don't date out of boredom. You don't give your heart halfway just to say you tried. When you love, you mean it. You pay attention. You remember small things. You imagine futures without realizing you're doing it. Not because you're delusional, but because that's how your mind works. You see potential where others see risk, and you know that scares people. Some people love with limits, with conditions, with an exit already planned. You don't. You love with the intention to stay if it's right. That's why breakups hit you harder. That's why disappointment lingers longer. That's why you take time to heal. Because when you commit emotionally, you don't do it lightly. People tell you to protect your heart, to be less invested, to stop giving so much. But they don't understand. Loving deeply isn't something you can switch off. It's how you experience the world. You feel things fully. Music hits harder, memories stick longer, connection means more, and yes, that makes life heavier sometimes, but it also makes it meaningful. You don't want love that feels replaceable. You don't want someone who treats you like an option among many. You want to be chosen the same way you choose, intentionally, fully, without hesitation. And until that exists, you'd rather be alone than half present in something shallow. That's the part people miss. A hopeless romantic isn't desperate for love. They're selective. They'd rather wait than cheapen the way they love just to fit in. So when you say you're a hopeless romantic, what you really mean is you still believe connection matters. You still believe loyalty is rare. You still believe love should feel like home, not like a negotiation. And even after heartbreak, after disappointment, after learning how badly love can hurt, you don't shut down, you slow down. You heal. You keep your heart intact because the world already has enough people who don't care. What it doesn't have enough of are people willing to love honestly without pretending it's easy. And that's not weakness, that's conviction. Being a hopeless romantic isn't about expecting perfection. It's about refusing to treat love like something disposable. It's knowing that connection is rare and not watering it down just to seem unaffected. You don't fall for people easily, but when you do, it's intentional. You don't love out of loneliness, you love out of recognition. There's a moment where you see someone, not just who they are, but who they could be with you, and something in you locks in, not obsession, not fantasy, commitment, and that's where people misunderstand you. They think you're idealizing, they think you're rushing, they think you're setting yourself up to get hurt, but what they don't see is how much restraint it takes to love like this in a world that treats feelings like liabilities. You know how badly it can go. You've felt the disappointment, the silence, the slow realization that someone didn't choose you the way you chose them, and still, you don't turn cold, you don't reduce love to strategy, you don't keep score, you don't enter connections with a backup plan. Because loving halfway feels worse to you than losing someone you loved fully. You want the kind of love that's unmistakable, where effort doesn't fluctuate, where intentions don't need decoding, where loyalty isn't treated like something rare or surprising. You want love that's steady, not loud, not chaotic, not anxiety disguised as excitement, just real. And yes, that means you get hurt deeper, because when you love, you're all the way in. You don't protect yourself by caring less. You protect yourself by choosing carefully. That's the difference. A hopeless romantic isn't reckless. They're discerning. They'd rather be alone than share space with someone who makes them feel like they're asking for too much just by wanting honesty, effort, and presence. And if that means waiting longer, so be it. Because you're not waiting for attention. You're waiting for alignment. For someone who doesn't flinch at your depth, who doesn't joke about your softness, who doesn't need you to tone it down to make things easier. Someone who sees the way you love and says, good, I do too. So no, you won't stop being a hopeless romantic, not because you haven't learned, but because you've learned exactly what it costs and you've decided it's still worth it. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't know how to love a little. You either feel it or you don't. And when you feel it, it changes the way you move. You start noticing the small things, the way someone texts you when they're busy, the way they remember what you said weeks ago, the way they look at you when you're not trying, and you don't call that doing too much, you call that real. But the world tries to train that out of you. It tells you to be chill, to act like you don't care, to keep your feelings locked up until someone earns them. So you try to play that role, you try to be distant, try to be casual, try to treat love like it's just another thing, and it never works, because that's not who you are. You don't want a connection where you're constantly guessing. You don't want to be with someone who makes loyalty feel rare. You don't want a love that only shows up when it's convenient. You want the kind of love that feels chosen, not maybe, not we'll see, not I'm not sure, chosen. And sometimes that's what makes it lonely, because you keep meeting people who like the attention, but don't respect the intention. People who love the way you make them feel, but don't want to carry the responsibility of caring back, so you end up doing the hardest thing for someone like you. You walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally realized love shouldn't require you to beg for consistency. A hopeless romantic doesn't stay where they're confused. They don't keep giving their heart to someone who treats it like something optional. They'd rather be alone than feel lonely next to someone, and that's not weakness, that's standards. Because if you love deeply, you have to protect that depth, not by becoming cold, but by becoming honest about what you need, and what you need is simple: presence, effort, loyalty, clarity. The kind of love that doesn't make you question yourself for wanting something real. What hurts the most as a hopeless romantic isn't rejection. It's realizing someone enjoyed being loved by you, but never intended to love you the same way. They like the attention, the consistency, the way you showed up without hesitation, but when it came time to match that energy, to choose you with the same certainty, they hesitated, and that hesitation sticks with you because you don't love casually, you don't give pieces of yourself without meaning to. So when someone accepts your love without offering clarity in return, it feels like betrayal, even if they never promised anything. That's the quiet pain of being a hopeless romantic. You assume people love the way you do, with intention, with follow-through, with the understanding that feelings carry weight, and when they don't, you start questioning yourself. Am I asking for too much? Am I moving too fast? Am I wrong for wanting something solid? But the truth is, you weren't wrong. You were just loving someone who didn't have the same capacity. Some people like being cared for more than they like caring back. They want the benefits of your depth without the responsibility of meeting it, and learning that forces you to grow. Not by loving less, but by loving smarter. You start paying attention to actions, to consistency, to whether someone shows up when it's easy and when it's inconvenient. You stop pouring into people who only give when it suits them, not because you've become colder, but because you've learned your heart isn't something everyone deserves access to. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you accept crumbs. It means you believe in love enough to walk away when it's not being returned honestly. And that's the part people don't see. Your softness comes with strength. Your depth comes with discernment, because loving deeply also means knowing when to stop. Being a hopeless romantic means waiting doesn't scare you. Settling does. You've seen what happens when people accept love that's almost right. They grow quieter, they grow distant, they start convincing themselves that good enough is enough, and you know that could never be you. You don't want a relationship that slowly drains you. You don't want love that feels like compromise from the very beginning. So you wait, not because you think you're better than anyone else, but because you know yourself. You know how deeply you attach, how fully you commit, how once your heart is in, it doesn't wander. And you also know what happens when that kind of heart ends up in the wrong hands. It gets taken for granted, it gets tested, it gets stretched until it starts hurting more than it should. So patience becomes protection. You don't rush intimacy. You don't force connection. You let people show you who they are before you give them access to who you are. That's not fear, that's wisdom earned the hard way. Some days the waiting feels heavy. You watch people pair off quickly. You hear about relationships that just happened. You wonder if maybe you're overthinking things, but deep down you know the truth. You're not waiting for attention, you're waiting for alignment, for someone who doesn't flinch when things get real, who doesn't pull back when feelings deepen, who doesn't treat commitment like a loss of freedom. You want someone who stays present, who chooses you clearly, who doesn't make you question whether you're asking for too much, because to you, love isn't supposed to feel confusing. It's supposed to feel steady, and until that exists, being alone is still better than being half-loved. That's the quiet strength of being a hopeless romantic. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't lower your standards just to say you're not alone. You wait, not because you're hopeless, but because you believe the right love won't require you to betray yourself. People like you feel things more intensely, not because you're dramatic, but because you're present. When something matters to you, it doesn't sit quietly in the background, it moves through you, it stays with you. Love doesn't just pass through your life, it marks it. That's why moments linger longer, why memories feel heavier, why connections don't fade easily once they've mattered. And people tell you that's a problem. They say you should care less, detach quicker, move on faster. But they don't understand what intensity really is. Intensity isn't chaos, it isn't instability, it isn't losing control. It's depth. It's the ability to feel joy fully and grief honestly, to experience connection without numbing yourself just to make it easier. You You don't skim life, you dive into it. And that's why love feels different to you than it does to most people. You don't forget easily, you don't replace people quickly, you don't treat connection like something interchangeable. When you love, it's intentional. That's why heartbreak hits harder. Because you didn't hold back, you didn't love with conditions, you didn't prepare an exit in advance, you showed up honestly. And while that hurts more in the moment, it also means something important. Nothing about your love was fake. You don't look back wondering if you tried hard enough, if you cared enough, if you were too guarded. You know you gave what you had, and that kind of certainty matters. Intensity becomes a problem only when it's given to the wrong people. With the right person, your depth won't feel overwhelming, it'll feel grounding. They won't ask you to tone it down. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't treat your feelings like something they need to manage. They'll meet you there, because the truth is, the world doesn't need fewer people who feel deeply. It needs more people who aren't afraid to. And being a hopeless romantic means you refuse to apologize for having a heart that actually shows up. At some point, you learn how to guard your heart without becoming guarded. That's a hard balance for someone like you, because you don't want to turn cold. You don't want to love halfway. You don't want to build walls so high that nothing real can get in. But you also know what happens when you give too much, too soon, to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. So you change, not by loving less, but by loving slower. You stop giving access before effort is proven. You stop filling in the gaps when someone shows you inconsistency. You stop romanticizing potential over behavior, and that doesn't feel natural at first, because you're used to leading with your heart, used to giving people the benefit of the doubt, used to assuming good intentions. But experience teaches you something important. Being open doesn't mean being unprotected. You can still be warm without being available to everyone. You can still be deep without drowning in the wrong places. So you watch, you listen, you notice who shows up consistently and who only appears when it's convenient. You let people reveal themselves instead of rushing to explain them. And that's when your love becomes safer, not smaller. You're still a hopeless romantic. You still believe in connection. You still want that kind of love where effort feels mutual and presence feels natural. But now, you don't mistake interest for intention. You don't confuse words with commitment. You don't chase clarity, you wait to see it. And that patience isn't fear, it's respect for yourself, because you finally understand that the right person won't need you to rush your heart to keep them close. They'll move at a pace that protects what you're building together. And when you feel that, you won't have to second guess it. You'll know. There's a phase every hopeless romantic goes through that feels especially isolating. It's the part where you've learned enough to stop choosing the wrong people, but you haven't met the right one yet. So you're not heartbroken anymore. You're not chasing. You're not settling. You're just alone, and people don't understand that version of you. They assume you've become distant, that you've lost interest, that you've changed, but really you've just stopped forcing connection where it doesn't fit. You're not closed off, you're selective, you're not cold, you're careful. You've reached a place where surface level attention doesn't move you anymore. Small talk feels hollow, inconsistent effort feels loud, mixed signals feel exhausting, so you walk away sooner, you disengage faster, you don't explain yourself as much, and that can feel lonely, because now you're surrounded by people but not met by anyone. You want depth, you want presence, you want someone who doesn't flinch when emotions enter the room, and until that shows up, nothing else feels worth your heart. This is usually the point where people tell you to lower your standards, to be more flexible, to give someone a chance, but they don't understand what it costs you to love the wrong person. They don't feel the aftermath the way you do, the way it lingers, the way it reshapes you. So you hold your ground, even when it feels quiet, even when it feels like you're the only one still believing in something deeper. because you know this loneliness is different from the loneliness you felt before. Before, you were lonely because you were giving your heart to people who couldn't hold it. Now you're lonely because you're protecting it, and that difference matters. This space isn't empty. It's the space right before alignment. The moment right before someone finally sees the way you love and doesn't ask you to soften it. And even though it's hard, even though it tests your patience, you stay here because you know the right love won't arrive while you're busy entertaining the wrong ones. Being a hopeless romantic was never about fantasy. It was about faith. Faith that connection matters, that loyalty still means something, that choosing one person fully isn't outdated, it's intentional. For a long time, you wondered if this way of loving was something you were supposed to grow out of, if heartbreak was meant to harden you, if disappointment was meant to teach you to want less, but it never did. Every time you tried to love casually, it felt wrong. Every time you tried to detach, you felt empty. Because loving deeply was never a habit you picked up. It was part of who you are. You weren't built to love halfway. You weren't meant to treat people like options. You weren't meant to keep one foot out the door just in case. And yes, that made the journey harder. You felt things more intensely. You lost futures you had already imagined. You walked away from people you still cared about because they couldn't meet you where you stood. But none of that was wasted. Every disappointment refined you. Every heartbreak taught you discernment. Every lonely stretch strengthened your standards, not so you'd love less about it, but so you'd love right. Now you understand something clearly. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still refuse to settle. You don't want perfect love, you want present love. The kind that doesn't confuse you. The kind that doesn't require self-editing. The kind that chooses you with the same certainty you offer in return. And when that finally arrives, it won't feel overwhelming. It won't feel chaotic. It won't feel like something you have to chase. It'll feel calm, mutual, safe. You won't wonder where you stand. You won't question if you're asking for too much. You won't feel like you're loving harder than you're being loved. And in that moment, everything will make sense. All the waiting, all the walking away. All the times you chose being alone over being half-loved. You weren't too much. You were just ahead of your time in a world that forgot how to love with intention. So no, being a hopeless romantic isn't something you need to fix. It's something you protect, because when the right person finally meets you there, they won't try to change you. They'll recognize you. You'll realize you were never hopeless at all. You were just holding out for a love that was worthy of you. It's Valentine's Day, and yeah, I'm alone. No dinner plans, no flowers. No good morning, beautiful text waiting on my phone. Just me. And for a second, it hits. You scroll and see everyone posted up. Roses, candles, soft captions about my forever. And you start wondering what it feels like to be chosen like that. Not privately, not secretly, but confidently. I won't lie, there's a quiet sting to it. Not because I need the holiday, but because it reminds you of what you don't have. It makes you question things. Am I behind? Am I unlovable? Did I miss my person somehow? But here's the part I'm learning. Being alone today doesn't mean I'm unwanted. It means I haven't settled. I could have been in something halfway. Could have forced a connection just to say I wasn't alone tonight, but I didn't. And that matters. So yeah, I'm alone, but I'm not desperate, not chasing, not pretending, just here. And maybe that's not sad. Maybe it's strength. Valentine's Day has a way of making you feel behind. Like everyone else got the memo and you didn't. You open your phone and it's everywhere. Couples at dinner, surprise gifts, long captions about my person. And even if you're strong, even if you've healed, even if you're okay most days, comparison still creeps in. You start measuring your life against highlight reels. You forget that people only post the soft parts. You forget the arguments, the doubts, the almost breakups. All you see is what you don't have. And for a minute, it makes being alone feel heavier. Not because you suddenly need someone, but because the world makes it look like today is proof of something. Proof that you're chosen, proof that you're loved, proof that you made it. But here's the truth nobody posts. A relationship on Valentine's Day doesn't mean it's healthy. Flowers don't mean loyalty. A dinner reservation doesn't mean forever. And being alone doesn't mean you failed. It just means your story isn't on display today, and that's okay. There's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely, and today forces you to notice it. Being alone is physical. It's no dinner plans, no shared dessert, no one reaching for your hand across the table. Lonely is emotional. Lonely is feeling unseen even when someone's sitting next to you. Lonely is being in a relationship where you still question if you matter. I've been lonely with someone before, and honestly, that felt worse than tonight, because at least now I'm not pretending. I'm not settling for half attention just to say I'm not alone. I'm not forcing conversation to avoid silence. It's just me. And yeah, sometimes that's quiet, sometimes it's heavy, but it's honest. There's no confusion here, no mixed signals, no wondering where I stand. So maybe being alone today isn't the loss I thought it was. Maybe it's just space for something real instead of something convenient. Let's be real. There's always that moment where you think about texting someone, not because you miss them, not because you want them back, but because you don't want to feel alone tonight. You scroll, you hover over a name, you think, it's just a harmless message, just a hey, just what are you up to? Just something to fill the silence. And for a second, your pride and your loneliness argue, because attention is easy to get. Connection isn't. You could text the almost, the ex, the person who only shows up when it's convenient, and maybe they'd respond. Maybe they'd even make you feel wanted for a few hours. But tomorrow, you'd wake up right back in the same place, because you didn't want them, you wanted distraction. And there's a difference. So instead of reaching for temporary comfort, you sit with the quiet. You choose not to reopen doors that were closed for a reason. You choose not to trade peace for short-term validation. And that choice, that's growth. Being alone tonight doesn't mean you're desperate. It means you're disciplined. There was a time this day would have broken me. I would have taken it personally, like it was proof that I wasn't enough. I would have blamed myself, wondered what I needed to fix, compared my timeline to everyone else's like love was some kind of race. But it doesn't hit like that anymore because I understand something now. Being single on Valentine's Day isn't a reflection of my worth, it's a reflection of my standards. I could have rushed into something, ignored red flags, stayed with someone who didn't choose me fully just so I wouldn't be alone today. But I didn't, and that's growth. This day doesn't control my value. It doesn't define my desirability. It doesn't measure my future. It's just a date on a calendar. And yeah, sometimes it still stings a little, but it doesn't shake me, because I'd rather spend one day alone than spend months with someone who makes me feel unseen. And that shift, that's peace. Spending Valentine's Day alone actually teaches you something. You learn who you are without someone validating you. There's no us to hide behind, no relationship status to lean on, no public display to prove you're wanted. It's just you, and that can feel exposing. Because when the noise dies down, you're left with your own thoughts. You start asking yourself, am I really okay? Am I lonely or just uncomfortable? Do I want love, or do I just hate feeling left out? And those questions matter, because being alone forces honesty. You realize you don't just want a relationship, you want the right one. Not someone to post, not someone to text for the night, not someone to fill space. You want something steady, intentional, real. And sitting alone tonight proves something important. You're willing to wait. You're willing to protect your peace. You're willing to sit through temporary discomfort instead of choosing permanent misalignment. That's not weakness, that's maturity. Valentine's Day alone doesn't mean you're lacking. It means you're not settling. Let's talk about self-love, but not the cliche version. Not the bubble baths. Not the, I don't need anyone speeches. Not pretending you're perfectly fine 24/7. Real self-love is quieter than that. It's not about convincing yourself you don't want love. It's about refusing to accept less just because you want it. It's choosing not to text someone who only values you when they're bored. It's not lowering your standards just to avoid feeling left out tonight. It's sitting in the discomfort without betraying yourself. Self-love isn't loud confidence. Sometimes it's discipline. It's saying I deserve something real, even when being alone feels heavy. It's acknowledging, yeah, I want to be loved without shaming yourself for it. Because wanting love doesn't make you weak, settling does. So if you're alone today, that doesn't mean you failed at self-love. It might mean you're finally practicing. There's a quiet strength in being single in a world that glorifies couples. Everything is marketed around us, dinner for two, matching gifts, shared experiences, and when you're alone, it can feel like you're standing outside of something everyone else was invited to. But here's what people don't talk about. It takes strength to not force a relationship just to fit in. It takes strength to say, I'd rather wait in a culture that says, just take what you can get. Being single isn't a flaw. It's not a delay. It's not a sign you're unwanted. Sometimes it's a sign you refuse to compromise your standards for temporary comfort. There's power in knowing you're not with someone just to avoid this day. There's power in walking into restaurants alone without feeling embarrassed, and going home to yourself without feeling incomplete, because your worth was never meant to be measured by who's sitting next to you. And the strongest thing you can do is stand alone without shrinking. Maybe the season of being alone isn't punishment, maybe it's preparation. Because when you're by yourself, you learn things you don't learn in relationships. You learn your triggers, your patterns, your standards. You learn what you actually want without someone else influencing it. Being alone gives you clarity. Clarity about what you won't tolerate. Clarity about what makes you feel safe. Clarity about the difference between attention and intention. And maybe that clarity is building something in you. Patience, discernment, emotional discipline. So when something real does show up, you won't grab it out of fear. You won't cling to it out of loneliness. You won't confuse it with the first person who makes you feel seen. You'll recognize it calmly because you'll know the difference between desperation and alignment. Maybe this Valentine's Day alone isn't a sign you're behind. Maybe it's proof you're becoming someone who won't settle. And that kind of growth doesn't always look romantic, but it lasts. At the end of the day, I'm still alone. No dramatic plot twist, no last-minute confession, no surprise flowers at my door, just me. But it doesn't feel heavy anymore, because being alone today didn't expose a flaw in me. It exposed my discipline. I didn't text someone out of boredom. I didn't settle just to post something. I didn't force a connection to avoid the silence. I chose peace, and that choice matters more than a dinner reservation ever could. Valentine's Day used to feel like proof that I was missing something. Now it feels like proof that I'm protecting something. My standards, my growth, my future. Because when love does come, I don't want it to be rushed. I don't want it to be convenient. I don't want it to be temporary. I want it to be real. So if that means spending this day alone instead of in something halfway, I'm okay with that. Being alone tonight doesn't mean I'm unloved. It means I'm waiting for something worth loving, and that's not sad. That's strength. Sometimes I don't question if I love people. I question if I'm loved the same way back. Not liked, not wanted when it's convenient. Actually loved. The kind of love that chooses you even when it's inconvenient. Because attention is easy to get. Replies are easy. Compliments are easy. Late night, I miss you texts are easy. But consistency is rare. And sometimes I sit there wondering, do they love me? Or do they just like how I make them feel? I show up fully, I remember details, I check in, I move intentionally. So when effort feels uneven, it doesn't make me angry. It makes me question everything. Am I asking for too much, or am I just asking the wrong person? You can be surrounded by people and still feel unloved, because love isn't about volume. It's about depth. It's about feeling chosen without begging, feeling secure without overthinking, feeling valued without performing. And when you don't feel that, you start shrinking. Sometimes the scariest thought isn't, what if they leave? It's, what if they're here but they don't love me deeply? Because half love is confusing. It keeps you around. It keeps you hopeful, but it never fully reassures you. And that's exhausting. I think a lot of us don't need more love. We need clearer love love that says what it means, love that acts how it speaks, love that doesn't leave room for constant doubt, because if I have to guess, it doesn't feel safe. And maybe the real shift isn't asking, am I loved? So I do, okay. Maybe it's asking, do I feel loved? Because love can exist, but if you don't feel it consistently, it won't heal you. It'll just confuse you. I don't want intense love. I don't want dramatic love. I want steady love. The kind that doesn't disappear when things get heavy. The kind that doesn't go quiet when reassurance is needed. The kind that doesn't make me earn my place. If I'm loved, I shouldn't have to decode it. I shouldn't have to overanalyze it. I shouldn't have to convince myself of it. Love shouldn't feel like a debate. It should feel like certainty. So am I loved? Maybe the better question is, am I staying in spaces where I consistently feel valued? Because real love doesn't make you question your worth. It reinforces it, and if I ever have to constantly wonder whether I'm loved, that might be my answer. Sometimes the question isn't, will I be loved? It's quieter than that. It's, is there something about me that makes love harder? Because when people keep leaving or hesitating or choosing someone else, you start internalizing it. You start wondering if maybe you're too intense, too emotional, too independent, too complicated, or maybe not enough of something, and no one ever says it directly. They just drift, they just lose interest, they just aren't ready, and you're left holding the pattern. So you sit there thinking, if I was easier to love, would they have stayed? Maybe you're not hard to love. Maybe you're just hard to manipulate, hard to breadcrumb, hard to keep around without effort, hard to confuse. And to the wrong people, that feels inconvenient. You ask questions. You want clarity. You don't pretend you're okay with half effort. That doesn't make you difficult. It makes you aware. And you keep encountering people who aren't ready for depth. Your standards start to feel like flaws. You start thinking, maybe if I needed less, maybe if I expected less, maybe if I was more chill, they would have stayed. But staying isn't the goal. Staying right is. And being easy to love often just means being easy to neglect. You're not hard to love. You're just not built for temporary. When rejection repeats itself, you stop seeing it as coincidence. You start seeing it as confirmation. Confirmation that maybe you're too much, too sensitive, too deep, too intense for people to handle long term. So you adjust, you soften your reactions, you downplay your needs, you act less invested than you actually are, because maybe if you seem lighter, less emotional, less attached, they won't leave. But here's what really happens. You slowly disconnect from yourself. You become quieter in relationships, less expressive, less honest about what you want. And when someone still walks away, it hurts even more, because now it feels like even the edited version of you wasn't enough. That's when the question gets louder. If even my smaller version isn't chosen, what does that say about me? But maybe it doesn't say anything about you. Maybe it says something about who you've been choosing. There's a difference between being hard to love and being hard to access. Hard to love sounds like a flaw, like you're difficult, complicated, too much work. Hard to access is different. It means not everyone gets the deepest parts of you. It means you don't open up instantly. It means your vulnerability isn't handed out casually. And that's not a weakness, that's discernment. You don't let just anyone in anymore. You don't overshare with people who haven't earned trust. You don't attach quickly just because there's chemistry. To someone who wants easy, that feels frustrating. To someone who wants depth, that feels rare. You're not hard to love. You're just not available for surface level connection. And the wrong people will always call that too much, but the right person, they'll call it intentional. Maybe the real issue was never that you're hard to love. Maybe you've been loving people who don't know how to love deeply. There's a difference. Some people like the idea of you, your attention, your softness, the way you show up for them. But when it's time to reciprocate, they struggle, not because you're asking for too much, but because they don't have that depth to give. And instead of admitting that, it's easier for them to label you. Too intense, too emotional, too serious. But wanting clarity isn't intense, wanting effort isn't emotional, wanting something real isn't serious, it's healthy. You're not hard to love, you're hard to half love, and that's where the tension comes from. Because people who operate casually feel pressure around someone who operates intentionally, but pressure isn't the same as incompatibility, it's just misalignment. When you're repeatedly misunderstood, you start questioning your depth. You start wondering if you feel too much, if you expect too much, if you interpret things too deeply, because when people keep saying, "It's not that serious," or "You're overthinking," you begin to shrink your instincts, you second guess your reactions, you silence your intuition, you tell yourself to calm down even when something feels off. But here's the truth. Depth feels dramatic to people who live on the surface. Emotional awareness feels intense to people who avoid vulnerability. Your ability to feel deeply is not a flaw, it's a capacity. And just because someone doesn't meet you there doesn't mean you're too much. It just means they don't swim that far. You're not hard to love. You're just not built for shallow connections. And that's not something you should dilute. At some point, the question changes. It stops being, "Am I hard to love?" and starts being, "Are they capable of loving me properly?" That shift is everything, because instead of dissecting yourself, you start observing them. Can they communicate clearly? Can they handle vulnerability? Can they stay consistent when things get real? Or do they pull away the moment depth shows up? You stop assuming you're the problem. You start noticing patterns. Some people love casually, some people love conditionally. Some people love only when it's convenient. And if you love intentionally, those dynamics will always clash. You're not hard to love. You're just not compatible with people who aren't emotionally available. And once you realize that, you stop shrinking, you stop softening your standards, you stop apologizing for wanting clarity. Because love isn't supposed to feel like convincing someone, it's supposed to feel mutual. What if being hard to love actually means you're built for something rare? Rare love isn't rushed, it isn't casual, it isn't convenient, it's intentional. And intentional love requires emotional maturity, self-awareness, consistency. Not everyone has that. So when someone meets you and realizes they can't show up fully, it's easier for them to say you're too much than admit they're not ready. Rare things aren't accessible to everyone. Depth isn't for everyone. Loyalty isn't for everyone. Emotional honesty isn't for everyone. You're not hard to love, you're selective. And selective love filters out people who only wanted access, not responsibility. You don't need someone who loves lightly. You need someone who loves intentionally. And that kind of love is never going to come from everyone anyway. At some point, you stop fearing the label. You stop trying to prove you're easy. You stop trying to shrink your depth. You stop trying to soften your standards. If loving you requires clarity, effort, and consistency, then that's the requirement, not an apology. You don't dilute your emotions anymore. You don't pretend you're fine with surface level. You don't act detached just to seem low maintenance. You embrace it. Yes, you love deeply. Yes, you need communication. Yes, you value stability. That doesn't make you difficult. It makes you intentional. And when you stop treating your depth like a flaw, you stop attracting people who are intimidated by it, because confidence changes your energy. You're not asking, is this too much? Like, you're asking, can they meet me here? And if they can't, you don't internalize it. You understand that not everyone is equipped for the kind of love you offer, and that's okay. So, am I hard to love? No, I'm just not easy to half love. I don't do confusion. I don't thrive on inconsistency. I don't mistake potential for commitment anymore. If loving me requires effort, that's because I give effort. If loving me requires honesty, that's because I offer honesty. If loving me requires depth, that's because I refuse to stay shallow. I used to think I needed to soften, to be less emotional, less aware, less intense, but the right love won't ask me to shrink. It won't call my standards too much. It won't label my needs as dramatic. It won't feel overwhelmed by my depth. It will meet it. So no, I'm not hard to love. I'm just built for someone who loves intentionally, someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't compare, someone who doesn't need convincing. And until that shows up, I'm not a problem to fix. I'm just not available for less. And that's not being hard to love. That's knowing exactly how I deserve to be loved. Being the introvert in the relationship means loving someone who lives louder than you do. They talk easily, they fill rooms, they connect fast, and you listen, you observe, you need quiet to recharge after loving hard. Sometimes it feels like you're standing next to someone who shines effortlessly while you glow quietly. They want to go out, you want to stay in, they gain energy from people, you lose it even when you're happy. And the hardest part is not the difference. It's wondering if your quiet way of loving is enough. Because you don't always say everything, you don't always show excitement loudly, but when you choose someone, you choose them deeply. Being the introvert doesn't mean you love less. It means you love in a way that's calm, steady, and intentional, and sometimes that gets misunderstood. Being with an extrovert means watching them move through the world with ease. They make friends everywhere, they're invited everywhere, people are drawn to them naturally, and sometimes standing next to that, you wonder where you fit, not because they make you feel small, but because you don't take up space the same way. They thrive in crowds. You count the minutes until you can recharge. They talk things out loud. You process everything internally first, and there are moments where you feel guilty for needing quiet after a long day of loving them. You worry that asking for space sounds like distance, that needing alone time sounds like disinterest, but the truth is, your silence isn't absence. It's how you stay present without burning out. Loving loudly isn't the only way to love deeply, and being quieter doesn't mean you're less committed. It just means your love lives in steadiness, not spotlight. The unspoken fear is that one day you won't be enough, that they'll want more noise, more people, more energy than you can give. You worry they'll mistake your calm for boredom, your need for quiet for distance. You love them deeply but not loudly, and sometimes you wonder if that difference will matter too much. You don't compete for attention, you don't need constant stimulation, you just want connection that feels safe and real. The fear isn't that they'll leave, it's that they'll outgrow you without realizing you were loving them in the only way that feels honest to you. But loving quietly doesn't mean loving less. It means choosing them without the performance. It means staying without needing the room to notice. The right partner won't need you to be louder, they'll need you to be you. Introverts love deeply in ways that aren't always obvious. You remember details, you notice shifts in mood, you feel things before they're said. While they're talking to the room, you're paying attention to them. You're the one who listens after the party ends, the one who creates calm when everything feels loud, the one who offers presence instead of constant stimulation. Your love shows up in consistency, not volume, in choosing the same person again and again, even when it's quiet, even when no one's watching. And often your extroverted partner doesn't realize how much they need that until life gets overwhelming, until they're tired, until the noise fades, until they need someone who knows how to stay still with them. That's when your kind of love becomes the anchor. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. Introverts and extroverts can work beautifully together, but only when both ways of loving are respected. You don't need to become louder to be enough for them, and they don't need to become quieter to be right for you. What matters is understanding that your need for space isn't rejection, that their need for people isn't avoidance. You recharge differently, but you can still meet in the middle. When an extrovert learns that quiet isn't distance, and an introvert learns that excitement isn't chaos, something soft happens. You stop trying to fix each other, you start protecting each other, you give them grounding, they give you expansion, and suddenly, the difference that once felt like a risk becomes the balance that makes the relationship work. Asking for space doesn't mean you love them less. It means you know yourself. Introverts don't pull away to create distance. They pull away to come back whole. But asking for that space can feel heavy. You worry it sounds like rejection. You worry they'll take it personally. You worry needing time alone makes you difficult to love. The right partner won't hear, "I need space," as "I don't want you." They'll hear it as, "I'm taking care of myself so I can show up better." You don't need to apologize for how you recharge. You don't need to explain it every time. Love doesn't require constant closeness to be real. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for a relationship is step back for a moment, not to disconnect, but to return as yourself. Introverts show love in quiet, steady ways. You remember the little things they forget they mentioned. You notice when their mood shifts before they say anything. You check in without being asked. Your love isn't loud. It's consistent. It's making space for them after a long day. It's choosing them in calm moments, not just exciting ones. It's staying present when things slow down. Sometimes you wish they could see it more clearly. Not because you need praise, but because your love doesn't always announce itself. But the right partner will feel it. They'll feel it in how safe they are with you, and how calm things get around you, and how you stay, Even when nothing exciting is happening, quiet love isn't invisible. It's just not performing, and the people who value depth will always recognize it. It's easy to compare yourself to an extroverted partner, to wonder why you don't light up rooms, why you don't want constant plans, why loving quietly feels like a disadvantage. But your quiet nature isn't something to fix, it's something that brings balance. You offer depth in a world of noise, you offer presence in a world of distraction, you offer steadiness when everything else feels fast. You don't compete for attention, you create connection, and when you stop comparing, something shifts. You stop shrinking next to their energy. You stop questioning your value. You stop feeling like you need to match them to be worthy of love. You realize your calm isn't less than their excitement. It's what gives the relationship somewhere to rest. And the right partner won't ask you to be louder. They'll thank you for being grounding. One of the quiet fears is being replaced by louder energy, by someone more outgoing, more exciting, more effortless in social spaces. You worry that your calm won't be enough forever. But the truth is, people don't stay for volume. They stay for how they feel when everything slows down. An extroverted partner may enjoy attention, but they rest in safety. They recharge in understanding. They stay where they feel accepted without having to perform, and that's where you shine. You offer a place where they don't have to impress anyone, where they can be tired, where they can be real. Loud energy is easy to find, steady presence is not, and the partner who truly values you won't look for replacement. They'll recognize that your quiet way of loving is exactly what makes the relationship feel secure. Being the introvert was never a disadvantage. It just doesn't announce itself. Your love lasts because it isn't fueled by excitement alone. It's built on presence, on listening, on staying when things are quiet and ordinary. You don't love for the room, you love for the person. And that kind of love doesn't fade when the noise does. The right partner won't ask you to be louder, faster, or different. They'll appreciate that with you. Love feels steady instead of overwhelming, safe instead of performative. So if you've ever felt like your quiet nature made you harder to love, it didn't. It made you the place someone can finally rest. And that's not less, that's rare. Loving quietly doesn't mean loving halfway. It means you choose depth over display. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most meaningful presence in someone's life. The right partner won't measure love by energy levels. They'll feel it in consistency, in safety, in how calm it feels to be with you. And one day you'll realize something simple. Your quiet wasn't something they had to tolerate. It was the reason they felt at home. We all know that one friend who's genuinely a good guy. Not the fake nice kind. Not the kind that's only good when it benefits him. I mean the real kind. The one who listens more than he talks. The one who checks in just because. The one who walks her home, texts, "Let me know when you get there," and actually waits for the reply. Not for points, not for validation. Just because that's who he is. He shows up when people call. He remembers small details. He gives effort without keeping score. And somehow, he's always the one that gets hurt. Girls say they want a good guy. They say they're tired of games, tired of being treated wrong. But when a good guy actually shows up, he gets pushed to the side, kept around just in case, treated like an option instead of a choice. He gets left on red, gets mixed signals, gets told, "You're amazing, just not right now." And then one day, he watches her choose someone who won't even do half of what he did. And the worst part? He doesn't complain about it, he jokes it off, acts like it doesn't bother him, plays it cool. But if you're paying attention, you see the change. He laughs less, questions himself more, starts wondering if being genuine is the problem. If caring too much makes him weak, if being a good guy even matters anymore, so he hardens a little, pulls back, stops giving as freely, not because he wants to be cold but because the world keeps teaching him that softness gets punished. It reminds me of Tanjiro from Demon Slayer. Gentle, compassionate, kind even to people who don't deserve it. People mistake that kindness for weakness until they realize how much strength it actually takes to stay good in a cruel world. That's the truth people forget. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't need to prove itself. Real strength is staying kind when life gives you every reason not to be. So if you know a guy like that, be there for him. Remind him that his heart isn't a flaw, that being good isn't something he needs to outgrow, because one day someone is going to see him, really see him, and they won't make him pay for the damage done by people who couldn't handle his heart. And when that happens, being a good guy will finally feel worth it. What people don't realize is how early Surely the good guy starts changing himself without even noticing. At first it's small, he replies a little slower, he stops double texting, he thinks twice before doing something thoughtful because he's scared it'll be taken the wrong way, not appreciated, or worse, ignored. He starts asking himself questions he never used to ask. Am I doing too much? Should I care less? Why do I always end up like this? And that's dangerous because now he's learning to dull the very traits that made him special. The world doesn't break good guys all at once. It chips away at him slowly. Every time his effort isn't matched, every time his loyalty is taken for granted, every time he's told he's perfect, but still not chosen. Eventually he starts building walls, not because he wants to play games, but because he's tired of being the only one who loses when he plays fair. He watches people who treat others poorly get rewarded with attention, love, and chances, and he wonders what he's doing wrong for choosing empathy instead of ego. But here's what nobody tells him. Being a good guy isn't about what you receive immediately, it's about who you become long-term. Patience he has, the emotional awareness, the ability to love deeply without needing control. Those qualities don't disappear just because they've been overlooked. They mature, and when the right person finally comes along, those same traits won't feel like a burden. They'll feel like safety, like home, like something rare in a world full of half-effort and emotional detachment. The good guy doesn't lose. He just waits longer for the right win. There's also something else the good guy carries that no one talks about. Guilt for feeling angry when he's treated unfairly, guilt for wanting to pull away, guilt for even questioning whether being kind is worth it anymore, because deep down he doesn't want to become someone he wouldn't recognize. So instead of expressing that frustration, he swallows it. He tells himself to be patient, to be understanding, to give people the benefit of the doubt, even when they've shown him who they are multiple times. And that self-control, that restraint, it takes more strength than most people will ever realize, but it comes at a cost. He starts to feel invisible, like his effort only matters when it's convenient for someone else, like his loyalty is expected, not appreciated, and the scariest part isn't that people take advantage of him, it's that he starts expecting it. That's when the good guy begins to question his worth. Not in a dramatic way, quietly, internally. He wonders if he needs to be colder to be respected, louder to be noticed, less caring to be chosen. And even though he doesn't like those thoughts, they creep in anyway. But here's the truth he needs to hear. The world doesn't need more detached people pretending they don't care. It needs more people who choose kindness, even when it's inconvenient. More people who know how to love without manipulation. More people who stay solid when everything around them feels fake. The good guy isn't weak for feeling deeply. He's strong for not letting pain turn him into something he's not. And one day that integrity will matter more than all the times he was overlooked. At some point, the good guy has to learn a hard lesson. Being kind doesn't mean being available to everyone. Being loyal doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. And having a good heart doesn't mean you owe it to people who keep proving they don't know how to handle it. This is usually the stage where he starts choosing himself. Not in a selfish way, not in a bitter way, but in a quiet, self-respecting way. He stops chasing people who only reach out when it's convenient. He stops over-explaining his intentions. He stops proving that he's different. Because the truth is, the right people don't need convincing. The good guy learns that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They don't block love, they block misuse. And once he understands that, everything changes. He becomes more selective with his energy, more intentional with who gets access to him. He still cares deeply, but now it's earned. This is where his strength really shows. He doesn't become cruel, he doesn't become cold, he just becomes aware. He learns that love shouldn't feel like constantly waiting your turn, that effort shouldn't feel one-sided, that if someone truly values you, they won't make you question where you stand. And when he finally meets someone who matches his energy, who sees his kindness as safety instead of weakness, it clicks. All the waiting, all the hurt, all the doubt, it suddenly makes sense. because the good guy wasn't wrong for being good. He was just giving his heart to the wrong people. There's a moment where the good guy finally realized something important. He was never meant to be understood by everyone. His way of loving was never designed for people who thrive on attention, chaos, or option. It was meant for someone who values depth, consistency, and intention. And once that clicks, he stops feeling ashamed of who he is. He understands now that not everyone deserves access to his softness, that some people only know how to take, not receive. And that doesn't make him naive, it makes him discerning. He doesn't need to change his heart, he just needs to protect it better. The good guy learns how to walk away without guilt, not because he stopped caring, but because he started caring about himself too. He learns that choosing peace over potential isn't giving up, it's growth. That silence is sometimes the loudest form of self-respect, and slowly something shifts. He speaks clearer, stops apologizing for having standards. He no longer wonders if being a good guy is worth it. He knows it is, because even if the world tried to harden him, it didn't succeed. He stayed true, and that integrity, that's something no one can take from him. One day, someone will meet him where he is. They won't question his intention, they won't test his loyalty, they won't confuse kindness for weakness. They'll recognize it immediately, and they'll protect it the same way he does. Until then, the good guy keeps moving forward, not bitter, not broken, just wiser. And when that day comes, it won't feel dramatic. It won't feel like a movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense all at once. It'll feel calm, familiar, almost quiet, because the right person won't make the good guy question himself. They won't make him wonder if he's doing too much or not enough. They won't make him feel like he has to shrink his heart to be accepted. They'll meet him where he stands. They'll appreciate the way he listens, the way he shows up, the way he loves without keeping score. And for the first time, he won't feel like his kindness is a liability. It'll feel like a gift, something mutual, something protected, something finally returned. The good guy won't have to explain himself anymore. He won't have to prove that his intentions are real. He won't have to play it cool or pretend he doesn't care. He'll be allowed to be exactly who he is, and that'll be enough. Until then, the journey matters. Every disappointment taught him boundaries. Every heartbreak taught him discernment. Every moment of doubt sharpened his sense of self. He didn't lose those years being overlooked. He was being prepared to recognize real love when it shows up, prepared to walk away from anything that feels half-hearted, prepared to protect his heart without hardening. So if you're that good guy reading this, don't change. Don't let the world convince you that you need to become colder to survive. Stay solid, stay honest, stay kind. Just be selective with who gets that version of you. Because the world doesn't need fewer good guys. It needs people brave enough to stay good even when it's easier not to. What people never see is how much discipline it takes for the good guy to stay the way he is. Every bad experience tempts him to harden up. Every time he's overlooked, replaced, or taken for granted, there's a voice in his head telling him to stop caring so much, to move differently, to love less, to become like everyone else. But he doesn't. Not because it's easy, but because he knows who he is. He understands now that changing his character to fit a broken system would only cost him himself, and losing yourself just to be chosen by the wrong people is a price that's too high. So instead of becoming colder, he becomes more intentional. Instead of closing his heart, he narrows the door. He learns that being good doesn't mean being accessible to everyone. It means being principled. It means having the strength to say no, to walk away, to choose solitude over disrespect. And that kind of self-control, that's rare. The good guy also learns to forgive, not to excuse what hurt him, but to free himself from carrying resentment. He doesn't want bitterness living rent-free in his heart. He wants peace, growth, clarity, and forgiveness is part of that process. And one day, when someone finally meets him with the same depth, the same consistency, the same effort, he'll recognize it immediately. Not because it feels intense, but because it feels familiar. Until then, he keeps building, keeps healing, keeps choosing integrity over impulse, because the good guy isn't waiting to be saved. He's becoming someone worth meeting. In the end, the good guy doesn't get a dramatic apology from everyone who hurt him. He doesn't get closure from every situation that left scars. And he doesn't get a moment where the world suddenly admits it was wrong for overlooking him. What he gets is something quiet and far more powerful. He gets peace. Peace in knowing he never had to become someone else to survive. Peace in knowing his heart stayed intact even after everything. Peace in knowing he loved honestly in a world that often rewards the opposite. He looks back and realizes that every time he was ignored, every time he was treated like an option, every time he was underestimated, it wasn't a reflection of his worth. It was a reflection of who couldn't meet him where he stood. And that understanding changes everything, because now he doesn't crave validation. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't beg to be chosen. He knows who he is. And when love finally finds him, the kind that's mutual, intentional, and steady, it won't feel like winning. It'll feel like alignment, like finally being understood without having to explain yourself, like being valued without having to prove. Until then, the good guy keeps walking forward, not bitter, not resentful, not hard, just grounded. And that's the kind of strength no one can take. The worst kind of pain is caring deeply and watching it backfire. Not because you expect anything in return, but because caring is just who you are. You show up without being asked. You check in on people who never think to check on you. You stay up late listening to problems that were never yours to carry. You give your time, your energy, your patience, not to be praised, just because you care, and somehow that becomes the thing that hurts you. Because some people don't meet kindness with care. They get comfortable with it. They start expecting it. They stop noticing it. Your effort becomes routine. Your consistency becomes invisible until one day you don't show up the same way anymore. That's when they finally notice. That's when they ask what's wrong. But by then you're already tired. Tired of explaining your intentions. Tired of proving your heart. Tired of giving pieces of yourself to people who never stay long enough to understand what it costs you. It's not that you regret caring, you just wish having a good heart didn't hurt this much. And maybe the hardest truth is realizing that loving deeply doesn't guarantee you'll be loved the same way. But that doesn't make your softness a weakness. It just means it needs protection. Don't stop caring. Just be careful who you hand that kind of love to. When you're the one who cares deeply, you usually become not the reliable one, the one people vent to, the one people lean on, the one who always answers. You're dependable in ways people don't even notice anymore. They assume you'll be there, assume you'll understand, assume you'll forgive, so they stop asking how you are, not out of cruelty, but because consistency gets mistaken for endless capacity. You start carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. Other people's stress, other people's problems, other people's moods, and you hold it all quietly because you don't want to be a burden the way you never see them as one. But over time, something shifts. You feel tired in a deeper way, not just physically, emotionally. You notice how rarely someone shows up for you the way you show up for them, how quickly your needs get overlooked, how easily your exhaustion goes unseen. And that's when it starts to hurt differently, because you didn't ask for much. You just wanted effort to meet effort, care to meet care, but instead you became the place people take from without realizing they're draining you. And slowly, being the strong one starts to feel like being the forgotten one. Eventually something changes, not in a dramatic way. You don't announce it, you don't make a scene, you just stop giving the same way you used to. You reply a little later, you don't over-explain anymore. You stop stretching yourself thin just to be available, and that's when people notice. Not when you were exhausted, not when you were drained, not when you were giving everything. They notice when you pull back. Suddenly they ask what's wrong, suddenly they feel the distance, suddenly they miss the version of you that was always there. And that part hurts, because it shows you something you didn't want to see. They didn't miss you, they missed the access, they missed the comfort you provided, the effort you gave without question, the way you made things easier for them. So when you stop showing up like that, it feels personal to them. But for you, it wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. You didn't stop caring. You just stop bleeding quietly, and realizing that is both painful and freeing because it teaches you this: anyone who only notices your absence was never really paying attention to your presence. When you finally start pulling back, the hardest part isn't the silence, it's the guilt. You feel like you're doing something wrong just by protecting yourself. You second guess every boundary. You wonder if you're being cold, if you're being selfish, if you're changing. Because when you spent your life being the one who gives, rest feels like laziness, distance feels like cruelty, and saying no feels like failure. You weren't taught how to have limits. You were taught how to endure. So the moment you stop overextending, your nervous system panics. It tells you to explain yourself, to soften it, to give just a little more so no one feels uncomfortable. But here's the truth: boundaries don't feel good at first because you're used to being useful, not protected. You learned that love meant access, that care meant availability, that being needed was the same as being valued. So when you remove access, it feels like you're taking something away, but you're not. You're just finally keeping something for yourself. And that discomfort, that's not you doing something wrong. That's you breaking a pattern that was costing you more than you realized. People who care deeply often confuse love with sacrifice. They believe loving someone means giving more, trying harder, holding on longer than they should. They tell themselves, if I'm patient enough, they'll notice. If I stay kind, it'll balance out. If I keep showing up, it'll be worth it. But love was never meant to cost you your peace. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being good meant being accommodating, that being loving meant putting yourself last. So you stayed quiet about your needs. You ignored your exhaustion. You told yourself it wasn't that bad as long as everyone else was okay. But sacrifice without reciprocity doesn't make love deeper. It makes it heavier. Because when you're always the one adjusting, the relationship stops being shared. It becomes one-sided. And the scariest part is people can get used to that version of you. They don't ask if it's costing you anything. They just assume you'll keep paying the price until one day you realize love shouldn't feel like self-abandonment. Caring deeply doesn't mean giving endlessly, and loving someone should never require you to disappear in the process. There's a moment when something finally clicks. You get tired of proving that you're genuine, tired of explaining your intentions, tired of showing people your heart just so they can decide whether it deserves care. So you stop performing, you don't overextend anymore, you don't chase reassurance, you don't give more just to feel secure. And at first that feels uncomfortable because you're not used to being this guarded. You're used to leading with softness even when it costs you. But protecting your heart isn't the same as closing it. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming selective. You start noticing who respects your limits and who only liked you when you were endlessly available. You see who adjusts with you, instead of expecting you to bend every time, and that's when you realize something important. You don't need to prove your kindness. The right people will feel it without needing to take advantage of it. Protecting your heart doesn't make you less loving. It just means you're finally loving yourself too. Once you stop overgiving, you start noticing something clearly. Not everyone reacts the same way. Some people get uncomfortable, they push back, they ask why you're different now. They miss the version of you that gave without limits and never asked for anything back. But others adjust. They respect the boundary. They meet you halfway. They don't make you feel guilty for needing space or balance. And that difference matters because it shows you who valued you and who only valued what you provided. The right people don't punish you for protecting your heart. They don't withdraw when you stop overextending. They lean in. They check on you. They notice your effort because it's no longer automatic. They give without keeping score. And for the first time, caring doesn't feel draining. It feels mutual. You realize you don't have to shrink your heart to keep people around. You don't have to exhaust yourself to be worthy of love. The people meant for you won't disappear when you stop stop bleeding quietly. They'll stay because they never needed you to hurt in order to feel close. At the end of all this, you realize something important. Your softness was never the problem. Caring deeply wasn't a mistake. Being attentive wasn't wrong. Showing up wasn't foolish. The pain came from giving that level of care to people who didn't know how to hold it. Because the right people don't drain you. They don't get comfortable taking. They don't wait until you pull back to finally notice your value. They see it while you're still giving, and they give back. With the right people, your kindness doesn't become invisible. Your effort doesn't become expected. Your heart doesn't become something to manage. It becomes appreciated. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to overextend. You don't have to lose pieces of yourself just to stay connected. Your softness becomes strength because it's met with care, not entitlement. And that's when you understand the goal was never to stop caring. It was to stop pouring your heart into places that couldn't return it. So keep your softness, just place it wisely, because in the right hands, your heart won't hurt this much. It'll finally feel safe. I've been thinking about something lately. There's a difference between being loved and being convenient, and sometimes I can't tell which one I am. Because you say you love me, you act like you care, you stay, but staying isn't the same as investing. You can stay in someone's life because they're easy, because they're understanding, because they don't cause too many problems, because they don't threaten your comfort. That doesn't automatically mean you love them deeply. And that's where my mind starts wandering. If I stopped being easy, if I stopped being patient, if I stopped adjusting when you're distant, if I stopped giving you the benefit of the doubt every time something feels off, would you still love me the same? Or would things start feeling heavier to you? Because I love in a way that's active. I think about you when you're not around. I consider how my actions affect you. I replay conversations to make sure I didn't hurt you unintentionally. I check in even when I'm tired. And I don't do that to be praised. I do that because I care, so when I don't feel that same level of intentionality back, it doesn't make me angry. It makes me unsure, because love shouldn't feel like something one person maintains. It shouldn't feel like if I stopped trying, everything would slowly collapse. Sometimes I wonder if you love the way I show up for you, but not the actual weight of loving me back, because loving me means consistency. It means emotional awareness. It means showing up even when you're stressed. It means reassuring without being asked 5 times. And I don't know if you're loving me or just enjoying how I love you. And that difference matters more than people think. Because I don't want to be someone's peace if I'm not also their priority. I don't want to be someone's stability if I'm not also deeply valued. I don't want to be easy to keep just because I'm hard to lose. I want to feel chosen loudly enough that I don't question it silently. And lately, I've been questioning it. I think what makes this question uncomfortable is that nothing is technically wrong. You're not cruel, you're not distant all the time, you're not openly careless. But love isn't just about what someone isn't doing. It's about what they are doing consistently. And sometimes I feel like I'm filling in emotional gaps you don't even notice are there. When I feel tension, I address it. When I sense distance, I close it. When communication weakens, I strengthen it. But when I pull back slightly, even a little, I can feel the difference immediately, and that tells me something. Because if the connection shifts the moment I stop overcompensating, then maybe I've been holding more weight than I realized. And that's exhausting. Not physically, emotionally. Because loving someone deeply while wondering if they love you with the same intentionality creates a quiet insecurity you don't talk about out loud. You start asking yourself subtle questions. If I didn't initiate, would they? If I didn't reassure, would they? If I didn't bring warmth into the conversation, would it still feel warm? And I don't want to think like that. I don't want to calculate effort. I don't want to measure energy. But imbalance forces you to notice patterns, and patterns don't lie. There's also a difference between being wanted and being valued. Wanted is temporary, wanted is emotional in the moment, valued is consistent. Valued means you're considered in decisions, valued means your feelings are handled carefully, Valued means someone protects the connection, even when things feel stable. Sometimes I feel wanted, but I don't always feel protected. And protection doesn't mean control, it means awareness. It means someone thinking, I don't want to lose this, so I'll handle it with care. I want to feel like that. I don't want to be someone you assume will always stay. I want to be someone you actively choose to keep, because there's a dangerous comfort in knowing someone is loyal. It can make you relax too much. It can make you stop trying as hard. It can make you think effort isn't urgent anymore. But love without continued effort slowly turns into maintenance, and maintenance feels transactional. I don't want to be loved because I'm stable. I don't want to be loved because I'm understanding. I don't want to be loved because I don't make things difficult. I want to be loved because I matter, because my presence is important to you, because losing me would actually affect you, not just inconvenience you. And if I ever have to question that for too long, then something isn't landing the way love should. Because when you're deeply loved, you don't feel like you're the only one holding the emotional glue together. You feel supported, you feel met, you feel secure enough to stop asking whether you're too much. And until I feel that consistently, not just in moments, not just after I express doubt, that question will keep circling in my mind. Do you love me, or do you just like having me around? There's something I haven't said out loud. I think I'm afraid of being loved comfortably. Not passionately, not intentionally, comfortably. Comfortable love is quiet. It assumes I'll always be there. It stops checking as much. It stops pursuing as much. It stops protecting the connection as carefully. And it doesn't look toxic. It just slowly feels less alive, less intentional. Because in the beginning, you pay attention to everything. You notice small mood changes, you ask deeper questions, you show up with energy. But once things feel secure, once I've proven I'm loyal, once you feel like I'm not going anywhere, do you still put in that same care? Or do you relax into the assumption that I'll always adjust? Because here's the truth, I do adjust. I understand when you're tired, I understand when you're stressed, I understand when you need space, but understanding shouldn't mean I absorb everything. It shouldn't mean I silently carry the emotional difference. And sometimes I feel like I do. Sometimes I feel like I love you in ways that require awareness, and you love me in ways that require comfort. There's a difference. Awareness asks, how does this affect them? Comfort asks, they'll understand. And I always do. But at what cost? Because when you're the emotionally steady one, the patient one, the consistent one, people forget you still need reassurance too. They forget you still need to feel chosen. They forget that even the calmest person can start questioning things if effort shifts. And I've felt shifts, not dramatic ones, small ones, less curiosity, less intentional communication, less urgency to fix small disconnects. And when small disconnects aren't addressed, they grow, not into explosions, into distance. And distance is quiet, it doesn't scream, it settles, it makes you feel slightly alone even when someone is right there. That's the part that scares me, not losing you. Feeling alone while still having you. Because if I'm going to love someone deeply, I don't want to feel like I'm maintaining it by myself. I don't want to feel like my emotional awareness is what keeps us stable. I want to feel met. I want to feel like if I pull back slightly, you lean in. I want to feel like if I'm overwhelmed, you step up. I want to feel like if I go quiet, you notice without me announcing it. That's love. Not just staying, not just saying it, but actively participating in it. And until I feel that consistently, not just when I bring it up, not just after conflict, not just when I look distant, that question will sit with me. Are you loving me deeply, or just loving the fact that I make things easy? I think the hardest truth I'm slowly accepting is this. If I have to constantly question the depth of your love, then something about it doesn't feel secure. And love without security becomes anxiety. Not loud anxiety, quiet anxiety. The kind where I replay conversations in my head, the kind where I overanalyze tone, the kind where I wonder if I'm asking for too much just because I want consistency. And I don't want to be that version of myself. I don't want to love guarded. I don't want to measure how much I give. I don't want to calculate who initiates more. I don't want to mentally track effort just to reassure myself that things are balanced, because love shouldn't feel like an equation. It shouldn't feel like if I relax, everything will slowly fall apart. It should feel shared, protected from both sides, maintained by both people. There's a difference between being loved and being relied on. Being relied on means you're useful. Being loved means you're valued. Being relied on means you bring stability. Being loved means someone protects your emotional stability too. Being relied on feels good at first. It feels important, but over time, if it's not matched with intentional care, it starts to feel heavy, because I don't want to be the emotional backbone of something without feeling emotionally supported myself. And here's the part that really matters. If I stopped being the easy one, if I stopped being the understanding one, if I stopped smoothing over tension before it grows, if I stopped filling emotional gaps without mentioning them, would you step up? Would you fight for it the same way? Would you lean in instead of leaning back? Or would things slowly drift because I'm no longer overcompensating? That question tells me everything, because real love doesn't depend on one person's emotional maturity to survive. Real love meets you halfway. It notices your silence. It responds to your distance with concern, not ego. It protects your heart even when you're not actively asking for protection. And I don't want dramatic love. I don't want obsessive love. I don't want love that feels like chaos. I want love that feels intentional. I want to feel chosen without begging for it. I want to feel prioritized without competing for it. I want to feel secure without constantly seeking proof. Because if you truly love me deeply, I won't feel like I'm guessing. I won't feel like I'm trying to convince myself. I won't feel like I'm the one holding the emotional glue together. I'll feel it in your consistency, in your effort after comfort sets in your willingness to maintain what we have instead of assuming it will maintain itself. And maybe you do love me, but if I constantly feel like I'm the one protecting the connection, then it's not balanced. And love without balance eventually becomes exhaustion. So the real question isn't just, do you love me? It's this: if I stop making it easy to love me, would you still love me the same? Or have I just been convenient all along? There's something about half-secure love that changes you slowly, not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. You stop asking for reassurance because you don't want to seem needy. You stop bringing up small things because you don't want to create tension. You start telling yourself it's not that serious, even when it is. And little by little, you become smaller inside the relationship, not because you're weak, because you're trying to protect it. But protection shouldn't only come from one side. I shouldn't feel like I'm constantly managing the emotional temperature. I shouldn't feel like I'm the one making sure things don't drift, because when you love someone deeply, you don't just assume they'll stay. You actively maintain the connection. You don't just rely on their loyalty. You honor it. And sometimes I wonder if you've gotten used to me, used to my patience, used to my consistency, used to the fact that I rarely overreact. And being used to is dangerous, because comfort without effort turns into complacency, and complacency slowly turns into distance. And distance is what makes someone start asking questions they never wanted to ask. I don't need to be chased every day, but I do need to feel chosen every day. There's a difference. Chasing is about excitement. Choosing is about intention. Choosing means you still show effort after the honeymoon phase fades. Choosing means you still check in emotionally even when nothing is wrong. Choosing means you don't let comfort replace care. And that's what I crave. Not intensity, not drama, not chaos disguised as passion. I want steady love, the kind where I don't have to analyze tone, the kind where I don't feel like I'm overthinking every small shift. the kind where my nervous system isn't constantly scanning for changes, because when love feels secure, your body relaxes. You don't brace for distance, you don't anticipate inconsistency, you don't question whether you matter that day, and lately I've caught myself bracing. That's what scares me. I've realized something about myself. When I start questioning whether I'm loved, I don't get loud, I get quiet, I observe more, I speak less, I test nothing, but I notice everything. I notice if you initiate, I notice if you reassure without being prompted, I notice if your effort stays steady or fluctuates, and if it fluctuates too much, I don't argue. I slowly detach, not because I want to, but because protecting my heart becomes instinct, and once I start detaching, it's hard to reverse, because detachment doesn't come from anger, it comes from exhaustion, from feeling like you've been carrying something emotionally alone for too long, and I don't want to detach from you. I want to feel secure with you, but security requires reciprocity. I think what hurts most is the possibility that you love me in your own way, but not in the way I need. And love isn't just about what you feel internally, it's about how it translates externally. If your love makes me feel unsure, if your love makes me feel like I'm asking for too much when I ask for consistency, if your love makes me feel like I have to shrink to keep the peace, then something isn't aligning, because real love doesn't make you question your value. It reinforces it. It doesn't make you wonder if you're too emotional. It makes you feel safe expressing emotion. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm constantly explaining why I need reassurance. I want it to feel natural, mutual, balanced. Here's the truth I don't say out loud. I don't want to compete with your comfort. I don't want to fight against your laziness. I don't want to beg for effort that should come naturally when someone truly values you. Because if you deeply loved me, you wouldn't want to risk losing me through neglect. You wouldn't let small disconnects grow. You wouldn't assume I'll always stay no matter what. You would treat the connection like it matters, not just when things feel unstable, but especially when things feel secure. Because secure love still requires maintenance, it still requires intention, it still requires showing up fully. And if I ever feel like I'm the only one doing that consistently, that's when love starts feeling heavy instead of safe. So do you love me? Or do you just like having me? Because those two things look similar at first, but over time, they feel very different. Liking having me means you enjoy my presence. Loving me means you protect it. Liking having me means you're comfortable. Loving me means you're intentional. Liking having me means you assume I'll stay. Loving me means you make sure I want to, and I don't want to stay somewhere I feel half secure. I don't want to slowly shrink just to keep something alive. I don't want to love loudly while feeling loved quietly. I want balance. I want mutual effort. I want to feel so consistently chosen that I stop asking myself this question entirely, because when you are deeply loved, you don't sit alone wondering. You feel it in the way they show up every day, not perfectly, but intentionally. And if I ever have to keep convincing myself that I'm loved, then maybe I'm not asking for too much. Maybe I'm just ready for a love that makes the answer obvious. There's a quiet kind of emptiness that doesn't feel dramatic. You're not falling apart, you're not in crisis, you just don't know why you're here. You wake up, you do what you're supposed to do, you get through the day. But underneath all of that, there's this question you don't know how to answer. What am I actually doing this for? You don't feel passionate, you don't feel called, you don't feel like anything is pulling you forward, and that scares you because everyone else seems so sure of where they're going. Having no purpose doesn't feel like sadness, it feels like drifting, like life is happening around you and you're just present for it, and no one really talks about that part. Not having a purpose doesn't mean you're failing. even though it feels like everyone else got some kind of direction you never received. Purpose isn't something people find all at once. It's not a switch that flips or a calling that suddenly appears. Most people are just moving forward with something small and calling it certainty. So when you don't feel that pull, you assume something is wrong with you. But a lack of purpose often comes from pressure to have a passion, pressure to be exceptional, pressure to turn your life into something meaningful as soon as possible. And when nothing fits, you feel empty, not because you lack value, but because you're tired of forcing meaning where it doesn't exist yet. You're not behind, you're just in a season where life hasn't revealed what it wants from you. And that's more common than anyone admits. Purpose usually doesn't appear because you thought hard enough about it. It grows out of living, out of trying things without certainty, out of getting bored, out of noticing what quietly holds your attention when no one is watching. So when you feel like you're drifting, it doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're between definitions, between who you were and who you haven't met yet. Drifting feels uncomfortable because it lacks labels. You can't explain it easily, you can't point to progress, but drifting is still movement. It's the space where you learn what doesn't fit, what doesn't excite you, what you don't want to carry forever. And that information matters. You're not failing at purpose, you're collecting data, even if it doesn't feel productive yet. It's okay if your life doesn't feel meaningful yet. Meaning isn't something you wake up with one day fully formed. Most of the time it shows up quietly, in moments you don't think are important, in things you do without an audience, in small choices that don't feel like destiny. The problem is we're taught to look for purpose as something big, a passion, a mission, a reason that explains everything. So when life feels ordinary or unclear or slow, you assume you're missing it. But meaning isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just learning how to care about something again. How to show up for one thing, one day at a time, without needing it to define your whole life. Not having purpose right now doesn't mean you never will. It just means you're still listening. Not knowing your purpose can actually protect you, because when you feel pressured to decide too early, you end up choosing something just to stop the discomfort. A path that looks good, a goal that sounds impressive, a version of purpose that belongs more to expectations than to you. And then you spend years trying to convince yourself it fits. Being unsure right now means you haven't locked yourself into the wrong story yet. It means you're giving yourself time to notice what feels honest, not just acceptable. Purpose that's chosen out of fear usually feels heavy. Purpose that grows naturally feels lighter even when it's hard. So if you're in the in-between, don't rush to label it. This pause isn't wasted time, it's you refusing to commit to a life that doesn't feel like yours. Purpose rarely starts as clarity, it starts as curiosity, a small pull towards something you don't fully understand yet, a moment where time passes a little faster than usual, a thought you keep returning to without knowing why, but because it doesn't feel big, you dismiss it. You tell yourself it doesn't count, that it's not serious enough, that it won't lead anywhere. So you wait for certainty instead of following interest, and the waiting feels like emptiness, but purpose isn't found by deciding your whole life at once. It's found by paying attention to what makes you feel slightly more alive than before. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need a calling. You just need one small thing that feels honest enough to try. Purpose grows from movement, not answers. Comparing your life to other people's purpose is what makes the emptiness heavier. You see people who seem sure, driven, certain, and you assume they know something you don't. But what you're seeing is confidence, not certainty. Most people choose a direction and grow into it later. They don't start with clarity. So when you compare their path to your uncertainty, you're not being fair to yourself. You're measuring your beginning against someone else's middle. Purpose isn't a race. It's not something you fall behind on. It shows up at different times for different people because it's shaped by experience, not pressure. The more you stop watching where everyone else is going, the easier it becomes to notice what's quietly calling you, and that's where purpose actually starts to form. It's okay if your purpose isn't impressive. Not everything meaningful looks big from the outside. We're taught that purpose has to be visible. A career, a mission, something people can point to and admire. So when what matters to you feels small, you dismiss it. But simple purpose still counts. Being someone who listens well, being steady when others are overwhelmed, creating small moments of calm, showing up quietly, consistently. Not all purpose is loud. Some of it lives in how you treat people, in how you carry yourself through ordinary days, in how you don't make the world heavier just by being in it. If your life feels purposeless right now, it might be because you're looking for something dramatic and missing what's already there. Purpose doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just the way you exist without giving up on yourself. Purpose often becomes clearer after you stop demanding that it explain your whole life. When you're constantly asking, what am I meant to do? Everything feels heavy. Every choice feels permanent, every step feels like a test, but purpose doesn't need to be a full explanation. Sometimes it's just direction, not destiny. When you allow yourself to live without forcing meaning, something softens, you try things without pressure, you follow curiosity without commitment. You let yourself change your mind, and slowly, patterns form, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to show you what feels right and what doesn't. Purpose doesn't arrive when you corner it. It shows up when you give yourself permission to live without answers for a while. Having no purpose right now doesn't mean your life is empty. It means it's unfinished. You're not meant to know everything yet. You're not behind for feeling unsure. You're not wasting time just because you don't have a clear direction. Some seasons are for building, some are for resting, and some are simply for becoming. Without labels, without answers, this space you're in isn't meaningless. It's where you're learning what matters to you by noticing what doesn't. Purpose doesn't arrive as a sudden realization. It grows quietly from the way you keep going, even without certainty. So if all you can do right now is exist, try, and stay curious, that's enough. Your life isn't without purpose, it's just still writing it. I knew it wasn't going to last, not because they said it, not because there were red flags everywhere, but because something in me never fully relaxed. Even in the good moments, there was a quiet voice saying, don't get too attached. I enjoyed it. I smiled, I played my part, but deep down, I felt the expiration date, and that's the weirdest kind of heartbreak. When you see the ending while you're still in the middle, sometimes your intuition whispers long before reality confirms it. There weren't major fights, no dramatic betrayals, no obvious reason to leave, but there was inconsistency, little things, energy that shifted slightly, effort that felt uneven, words that didn't fully match actions, and instead of confronting it, I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself to relax, to just enjoy the moment, to stop looking for problems, but intuition doesn't shout. It nudges, it tightens your chest a little, it makes you hesitate before getting attached, it keeps you half-guarded even when things seem fine, and I felt that, I just ignored it, because sometimes we don't want to be right, we want to be wrong about the ending, so why did I stay if I knew? Because sometimes temporary love still feels better than loneliness, because even if it wasn't forever, it was something. The late night conversations, the inside jokes, the way they looked at me when it was just us. I knew it had cracks, but I also knew it had moments, and I convinced myself that maybe moments were enough. Maybe I didn't need permanence. Maybe I didn't need certainty. Maybe I could just enjoy it without expecting it to stay. But that's the lie we tell ourselves. You can't emotionally invest and pretend you won't feel it when it ends. I stayed because I hoped my intuition would be wrong. I stayed because I liked them, because I wanted it to work, because walking away early felt dramatic, but sometimes staying longer just makes the goodbye heavier. There's a difference between anxiety and intuition. Anxiety is loud, it spirals, it imagines worst-case scenarios, it creates problems that don't exist yet. Intuition is quiet, it doesn't panic, it doesn't overreact, it just knows. And what I felt wasn't panic, it wasn't jealousy, it wasn't insecurity, It was a steady awareness that something wasn't aligned. I didn't feel chosen. I didn't feel secure. I didn't feel like we were building. I felt like we were passing time, and that's how you know. When the connection feels temporary, even while it's happening. Anxiety asks, what if they leave? Intuition says, they're not fully here. And deep down, I knew which one it was. Knowing it won't last doesn't make it hurt less. That's the part nobody tells you. You'd think being mentally prepared would soften the blow. It doesn't, because even if your mind saw the ending, your heart still participated. You still laughed, still opened up, still imagined what if. And when it finally ends, there's no satisfaction in being right. There's no relief in saying, I knew it. There's just grief. Grief for the version of it you hope might surprise you. Grief for the effort you still gave even while doubting. Grief for the potential that never turned into permanence. Knowing doesn't protect you. It just makes you feel like you watched crash in slow motion. And sometimes that's worse. Should I have walked away sooner? Maybe. But it's easy to say that now. When you're in it, you don't see it as wasting time. You see it as giving it a chance. You tell yourself, maybe it just needs more time. Maybe they're just figuring things out. Maybe I'm overthinking. Because walking away early feels extreme. It feels impatient. It feels like you're not fighting hard enough. But sometimes staying longer isn't loyalty. It's fear. Fear of starting over. Fear of being alone again. Fear that this might be the closest thing to love you'll get for a while. So you stay, not because it's right, but because it's comfortable enough. And when it finally ends, you don't just grieve them. You grieve the time you knew better, but here's the thing. You didn't stay because you're weak. You stayed because you hoped, and hope isn't something to be ashamed of. Next time I'll trust it, that quiet feeling, that subtle hesitation, that inner voice that doesn't panic, it just knows. Because ignoring it didn't protect me, it just delayed the inevitable. Next time, I won't wait for proof. I won't wait for the obvious red flag. I won't wait for the dramatic ending. I won't wait until I'm already attached. If something feels temporary, I'll ask why. If something feels uneven, I won't convince myself it's balanced. If someone feels half in, I won't invest fully. Not from a place of fear, from a place of alignment. Because intuition isn't there to ruin good things, it's there to protect you from forcing the wrong ones. And maybe I needed this ending to finally respect my own instincts. Not every connection is meant to last. Some are meant to wake you up to your patterns, to your boundaries, to the things you tolerate when you're lonely. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be forever. Maybe it was supposed to show you what half effort feels like so you'd stop accepting it. Maybe it was supposed to teach you that chemistry isn't compatibility, that attention isn't intention, that potential isn't commitment. Sometimes we meet people who aren't meant to stay. They're meant to reveal. Reveal where you overgive, where you ignore yourself, where you settle for almost, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So maybe it didn't last because it wasn't designed to build. It was designed to redirect. Endings don't always mean failure. Sometimes they mean clarity. We think if something doesn't last forever, it wasn't real, but that's not true. It was real. The feelings were real. The moments were real. It just wasn't permanent. And permanence isn't the only measure of value. Some connections exist to shift you, to sharpen your awareness, to strengthen your boundaries, to remind you what you need and what you'll never accept again. It didn't fail, it finished, and there's a difference. Failure feels like you did something wrong. Finish feels like it served its purpose, and maybe that's what this was. Not a waste, not a mistake, just a chapter that reached its natural end. I used to think knowing it wouldn't last was a weakness, like I was pessimistic, like I was sabotaging it, like I couldn't just enjoy something good. But now I see it differently. That feeling was awareness. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overthinking, I wasn't insecure. I was aligned enough with myself to recognize misalignment, and that's power, because next time I won't silence it. I won't stay longer than I should just to prove I can make something work. I won't ignore the quiet voice just because the moments feel nice. Knowing it wouldn't last didn't mean I didn't care. It meant I could see clearly, and clarity is growth. So no, It didn't last, but I did. I walked away more aware, more grounded, more in tune with myself, and next time, if it's meant to last, I won't have to convince myself of it. I'll feel that too. I miss who I was before her. Not because I don't believe in growth, not because I regret loving her, but because somewhere in the middle of trying to keep us together, I started losing pieces of myself. Before her, I was lighter. I didn't overthink texts. I didn't reread conversations searching for hidden meaning. I didn't question whether I was too much or not enough in the same breath. I moved through life steady, confident in who I was, comfortable in my own routine, secure in my own energy, and then I fell in love. And love is beautiful, but it also exposes you. It exposes your insecurities, your attachment style, your fear of loss. At first, it felt like growth. I was learning to compromise, learning to communicate better, learning to open up emotionally in ways I hadn't before. But slowly, something shifted. I stopped asking what felt right for me and started asking what would keep her happy. I stopped protecting my peace and started protecting the relationship. And there's a difference, because when you constantly adjust to avoid conflict, you don't even realize you're shrinking. You think you're being mature, you think you're being understanding, but sometimes you're just slowly abandoning yourself, and that's what hurts the most. Not that it ended, but that by the time it did, I didn't feel like the same person anymore. Before her, I didn't measure my worth through someone else's mood. If someone was distant, I assumed they needed space, not that I had done something wrong. If someone disagreed with me, I didn't internalize it as rejection, but with her, every shift felt personal, every silence felt loaded, every small argument felt like it could turn into something bigger, and instead of staying grounded, I started adapting, talking softer, holding back opinions, choosing peace over honesty, not because I was scared of her, but because I was scared of losing her. And when you start operating from fear instead of authenticity, you begin to change subtly. You become more careful than confident, more reactive than relaxed, more focused on maintaining connection than maintaining identity. I remember catching myself one day thinking, I wouldn't have reacted like this before. And that realization hit, because love shouldn't erase you. It should expand you, but I wasn't expanding, I was adjusting constantly, and the version of me that used to move freely was slowly becoming calculated, and I miss that freedom. I miss my peace, the kind of peace where I didn't wake up wondering how the day would feel emotionally, the kind where my phone didn't control my mood, the kind where silence wasn't threatening. Before her, I enjoyed my solitude. After her, I feared it, because I had trained myself to associate connection with validation. If we were good, I felt secure. If we were off, I felt unsettled, and that emotional dependency crept in quietly. I didn't notice it happening. I just noticed that when things ended, I felt empty in a way I hadn't before, not just because she was gone, but because I had built so much of my emotional rhythm around her. And that's when I realized I wasn't just grieving her, I was grieving myself, the version of me who didn't need reassurance to feel stable, the version of me who didn't overanalyze tone, the version of me who didn't question his value after every disagreement. That version felt strong, grounded, unshakable, and I want him back. I miss my boundaries. Before her, I knew what I tolerated and what I didn't. I didn't chase inconsistent energy. I didn't excuse disrespect. I didn't overextend myself for someone who wasn't meeting me halfway. But when you love someone, you justify things you normally wouldn't. You call red flags rough patches. You call inconsistency stress. You call emotional distance needing space. And sometimes those things are true, but sometimes they're excuses. And I made a lot of excuses, not because I was blind, but because I was invested. An investment makes you patient, sometimes too patient. By the end, I was tolerating things that the old version of me would have walked away from immediately, And that realization stings because it means I compromised more than I should have. Not just for the relationship, but at the expense of myself. The hardest part about missing who I was before her is admitting that I participated in my own transformation. She didn't force me to shrink. I chose to overextend. I chose to overcompensate. I chose to prioritize us over me every time there was tension. And that's a hard truth to sit with, because it would be easier to blame her entirely, but growth doesn't come from blame. It comes from ownership. I let love make me forget myself. And now that it's over, I have to rebuild the parts I neglected, not because loving her was wrong, but because losing myself in the process was. I miss my clarity. Before her, I didn't romanticize potential. If something felt off, I trusted it. If something felt unbalanced, I addressed it. But with her, I kept believing in what it could be, not just what it was. And hope is powerful. It keeps you fighting, it keeps you patient, but it can also keep you stuck. I held on to the version of us that existed in the beginning. The laughter, the effort, the mutual excitement, and I ignored the gradual shift because I didn't want to accept it. And that's when I stopped being objective. I became attached to the idea of us more than the reality of us, and that's not who I used to be. I miss how secure I felt alone. Before her, I enjoyed my independence, my routine, my hobbies, my friendships. I didn't need constant validation. I didn't need constant reassurance. But somewhere along the way, my world started revolving around her schedule, her availability, her emotional state, and I lost balance. When you give someone that much influence over your emotional state, you hand them power without realizing it. And when they leave, you feel powerless, not because you're weak, but because you attach too much of your stability to their presence, and I don't want that again. I want interdependence, not dependency. I don't regret loving her, but I regret abandoning myself while doing it. There's a difference. Love should complement you, not consume you. It should challenge you to grow, not pressure you to shrink. And I see now that the old version of me wasn't naive. He was grounded. He trusted himself. He walked away from imbalance without hesitation. And somewhere in trying to prove I could make it work, I stopped trusting my instincts. That's the part I want back, not the detachment. The discernment, maybe missing who I was before her, is actually part of becoming better than that version. Because now I see my patterns. I see how easily I overextend when I care. I see how quickly I prioritize someone else's comfort over my own. And awareness is powerful. The old me was confident, but this version, he's wiser. He knows how quickly identity can blur inside love. He knows how subtle self-abandonment can be. And next time he won't lose himself trying to hold something together. I miss who I was before her, but maybe I'm not supposed to go back. Maybe I'm supposed to rebuild, stronger, more self-aware, more balanced. I don't want the version of me who never loved deeply. I want the version who loves deeply without disappearing, who commits without compromising identity, who stays loyal without neglecting himself. She changed me, but she didn't ruin me. If anything, she exposed where I needed boundaries, where I needed balance, where I needed to remember who I am outside of a relationship, and I will get back to that version, not the one before her, the one after her, but wiser, stronger, and impossible to lose again. I really did love her, not just in the beginning, not just when it was easy. I loved her in the quiet moments, in the normal days, in the in-between. I loved the way she thought, the way she explained things, the way she cared too deeply sometimes. And that's what makes this harder, because it would be easier if I didn't love her, if it was fake, if it was surface level, if it was just attachment, but it wasn't. I loved her, and somehow that still wasn't enough. Love and compatibility aren't always the same thing. That's the part nobody prepares you for. You can love someone deeply and still not align long term. I loved her heart, her mind, her energy, but we handled conflict differently. We needed reassurance differently. We showed up differently under pressure. And love doesn't erase that. doesn't magically fix timing issues, communication gaps, emotional readiness. You can love someone and still slowly grow apart. You can love someone and still realize you're not building in the same direction. And that doesn't make the love fake, it just makes it human. Loving someone doesn't automatically mean you knew how to love them properly, and that's a hard truth. I loved her the best way I knew how, but sometimes the best I knew wasn't what she needed. She needed reassurance. I gave independence. She needed consistency. I gave effort in waves. She needed clarity. I gave feelings, but not always direction. And that doesn't mean I didn't care. It just means love without emotional maturity can still fall short. I thought loving her was enough, but love isn't just what you feel, it's what you show, what you maintain, what you're disciplined enough to protect. And sometimes you realize you loved someone deeply, but you hadn't learned yet how to love them well. Regret hits different when you know you tried, because it's not like I didn't care. I showed up, I put in effort, I stayed longer than I had before. But effort in the wrong areas doesn't always translate. I tried to fix problems instead of understanding them. I tried to be strong instead of being vulnerable. I tried to prove I loved her instead of learning how she needed to feel it. And that's the painful part. Knowing you weren't careless, just unaware. Regret isn't always about not loving someone. Sometimes it's about realizing you could have loved them better, and by the time you understand that, it's already over. You don't always realize someone's full value while they're still there. Sometimes you notice it in their absence, in the silence where their voice used to be, in the space where their presence felt normal, in the little things no one else does quite the same. The way she checked on me without making it obvious, the way she remembered details I forgot I even shared, the way she stayed patient when I was difficult. When you're used to someone loving you, you can mistake it for something ordinary, but once it's gone, you see how intentional it was. She wasn't too much, she wasn't overthinking, she wasn't needy, she was invested. And I didn't fully understand how rare that was until I felt the difference. Missing someone doesn't automatically mean you should go back. That's the confusing part. Because loneliness can sound like love. Silence can romanticize memories. Distance can soften the hard parts. I miss her laugh, her presence, the way she cared. But I also have to remember why it ended, the miscommunication, the emotional gaps, the moments we both felt unseen. Love alone isn't always enough to rebuild something, because going back requires more than feelings. It requires change, growth, accountability, consistency you didn't have before. And if I can't honestly say, I've grown into someone who can love her better, then missing her isn't a reason to reopen the door. Sometimes you can love someone deeply and still let them go with respect. Loving her changed me, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, permanent way. She made me more aware, more reflective, more honest with myself. I can't love casually anymore. I can't ignore emotional gaps. I can't pretend effort doesn't matter, because I've seen what real investment looks like. And once you experience that, your standards shift. You stop entertaining half effort. You stop confusing attention with intention. You stop thinking bare minimum is enough. She didn't just teach me how to love. She showed me how I need to be loved. And even though it didn't last, it wasn't meaningless. Some people aren't meant to stay forever. They're meant to upgrade you. Loving her set a new standard. And that's something I can't undo. I can't go back to surface level conversations. I can't go back to inconsistent effort. I can't go back to love that feels half present, because I've felt what depth feels like. I've felt what it's like to be understood without over-explaining, to be cared for without asking twice, to be chosen without confusion. And once you experience that, you can't pretend it doesn't matter. It ruined average for me. Not in a bitter way, in a mature way. Now I know what intentional love looks like. Now I know what emotional safety feels like. Now I know what real effort is, and I won't lower that standard just because I miss her. Loving her made me more careful, but not closed off, more intentional. I don't rush feelings anymore. I don't say I love you just because it feels right in the moment. I don't assume connection automatically means compatibility. I pay attention now to effort, to consistency, to whether we're building or just vibing. Because when you've loved someone deeply and lost them, you understand the weight of it. Love isn't casual to me anymore. It's responsibility, it's discipline. It's showing up even when it's inconvenient. And maybe that's the real proof that I loved her. She didn't make me bitter, she made me intentional. Was loving her worth it? Even though it ended? Yeah. Because not all love is meant to last forever. Some love is meant to teach you who you are, who you're not, who you're becoming. I loved her, and even though we didn't make it, that love wasn't wasted. It showed me my gaps. It exposed my immaturity. It forced me to grow. It raised my standards. It deepened my emotional awareness. It changed how I show up now, and that matters, because one day when I love someone again, I'll love clearer, stronger, more consistently, not because I forgot her, but because loving her made me better. So yeah, it hurt, it ended, but I really did love her, and that will always mean something. I stayed loyal. That's the part that messes with me the most. Not because I regret it, but because I know I was real the whole time. I didn't switch up. I didn't look for other options. I didn't keep backups just in case. When I said I was with her, I meant it. Even when things fell off, even when her energy started changing, even when I had moments where I could have pulled back and protected myself, I didn't. Because in my head, loyalty wasn't something you give only when it's easy. It's something you keep, especially when it's not. So I stayed consistent, I stayed patient, I stayed solid in a situation that slowly stopped being solid back. And the crazy part is, while I was staying loyal, she wasn't. The part that's hard to explain is how I stayed the same, even when everything around me started changing. I noticed it, the distance, the shift in energy, the way conversations didn't feel the same anymore. I'm not blind, I saw the signs, but I chose to stay loyal anyway, because I told myself something simple. If I'm real about this, I don't switch up just because it gets uncomfortable. So I didn't match her energy when it dropped. I didn't start moving different. I didn't go looking for someone else just because things felt uncertain. I stayed. I kept showing up the same way I always did. And maybe that was my mistake, not being loyal, but being loyal to someone who had already started moving differently behind the scenes. Because while I was protecting what we had, she was slowly stepping out of it, and I didn't want to believe that, because loyalty makes you believe in what something was, even when it's no longer what it is. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in pieces, little realizations that didn't fully make sense at first, moments where things felt off, but not off enough to walk away. I would notice small things, the way she moved differently, the way her attention felt split, the way her consistency started depending on her mood, and every time I noticed it, I told myself the same thing. Don't overthink it, because when you're loyal, you don't want to accuse someone of something they haven't admitted. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You trust what you had, instead of questioning what it's becoming. So I stayed grounded, I stayed the same. I kept treating her like she was still fully in it, even when deep down I could feel she wasn't. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that she switched up, but that I stayed solid while she was already moving differently. At some point, the truth became impossible to ignore, not because she said it, but because her actions started saying it for her. You can feel when someone isn't fully there anymore. You don't need proof, you don't need confirmation. It's in the energy, the way they reply, the way they move, the way they stop showing up the same way they used to. And I felt that, but I stayed loyal anyway, because I kept thinking loyalty meant holding on, holding it together, holding on to what we had, even if it was slipping. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. You can't hold something together by yourself, and I was the only one holding. The more I look back at it, the more I realize something that's hard to accept. I wasn't just being loyal, I was ignoring reality, because loyalty doesn't mean staying blind. It doesn't mean pretending everything is okay when it's clearly not, but that's what I was doing. I was staying consistent in a situation that was becoming inconsistent. I was giving the same energy to someone who had already started giving less, and the imbalance kept growing slowly, quietly, until it was obvious. But by then, I had already invested too much to walk away easily, and then it finally happened. Not in some dramatic way, not in a way that gave me closure, just clarity. She wasn't loyal, not in the way I was. While I was choosing her every day, she was leaving space for something else, maybe someone else, maybe just options, but either way, she wasn't standing where I was standing. And that realization hits different because it's not just about losing someone, it's about realizing you weren't standing on the same level the whole time. For a while, that made me question everything, not just her, myself. I started thinking, was I too loyal? Did I stay too solid? Should I have moved differently? Because when someone hurts you while you're being real, it makes you feel like being real was the mistake, but it wasn't. Loyalty wasn't the problem. Giving it to the wrong person was, and that's the shift that took time to understand. Because I didn't lose by being loyal. I didn't lose because I stayed real. If anything, that's the part I kept. That's the part that didn't change. She changed. She moved different. She chose differently. But me, I stayed who I said I was. And that matters more than it feels like it does in the moment. And because here's the truth, no one tells you right away. Being loyal to the wrong person will hurt. But it will also teach you exactly what real loyalty should look like when it's returned. It shows you the difference between someone who says they care and someone who actually stands on it. And once you've felt that difference, you stop settling for anything less. You stop accepting half effort. You stop excusing inconsistency because now you know what it feels like to give fully. So next time, you expect it back. So yeah, I stayed loyal and she didn't, and for a while that felt like I lost, but now I see it differently because loyalty isn't something you regret, it's something you protect. You just learn who deserves it. The right person won't make you question it, won't make you feel like you're the only one holding things together, won't make you feel stupid for being real. They'll match it naturally, consistently, without you having to ask. So no, I'm not changing the way I love, I'm just changing who I give it to, because being loyal isn't the mistake. Giving it to someone who wasn't is. I stayed loyal, even when it got hard, even when we were arguing more than laughing, even when my friends were telling me I deserved better, even when I felt unappreciated. I stayed. Not because I didn't have options, not because I couldn't walk away, but because when I commit fully. Loyalty isn't something I switch on and off depending on how I feel that week. It's a decision, and I made it. I ignored distractions, I curved attention, I shut down conversations that crossed boundaries. Not because I was scared of getting caught, but because I respected what we had. So when I found out she didn't stay loyal, it didn't just hurt, it confused me. Because how do two people sit in the same relationship and value it completely differently? The part that messed with me wasn't just the betrayal, it was a realization that while I was protecting us, she was exploring her options. While I was defending her name in rooms she wasn't in, she was entertaining someone else's attention. While I was shutting down temptation quietly, she was responding to it. And that imbalance hits deeper than people realize, because loyalty isn't loud. You don't get applause for it. No one congratulates you for not cheating. It's invisible, it's internal, it's discipline. So when you find out the person you were loyal to didn't have that same discipline, it makes you feel stupid for being solid, like you overinvested, like you believed in something that wasn't mutual. I started replaying everything, playing. Was she distant because she was already talking to someone else? Were those late replies really just being busy? Was I fighting for something that was already slipping away? Because once trust cracks, your mind rewrites history. You start connecting dots that might not even be there. And that's exhausting, because loyalty is built on trust, and once trust is broken, even your memories feel unstable. I wasn't perfect, but I was faithful, and that matters, because loyalty isn't about being flawless, it's about being intentional. It's about choosing your partner even when temptation is available. It's about respecting boundaries even when no one is watching. And I did that, she didn't. What hurts the most is knowing I would have never done that to her. I wouldn't have risked what we built for a moment of validation. I wouldn't have jeopardized long-term trust for short-term attention, because I understood the weight of betrayal, and she didn't treat it like it was heavy. That's what breaks something inside you, not just the act, the carelessness, because cheating isn't always about love disappearing. Sometimes it's about discipline disappearing. And if someone lacks discipline and loyalty, they'll lack it when things get hard too. For a while I questioned myself. Was I too available, too forgiving, too trusting? Did my loyalty make me predictable? Because when you get betrayed, your brain tries to find ways to avoid feeling powerless again. But here's the truth. My loyalty wasn't weakness, it was character. And her disloyalty wasn't power, it was immaturity. There's a difference. One requires strength, the other requires impulse. People think being cheated on makes you look foolish, but the real foolishness is betraying someone who was solid. I lost someone who didn't value loyalty. She lost someone who actually lived by it, and those are two very different losses, because I can recover, I can heal, I can rebuild, but replacing someone who is genuinely loyal, that's harder than people think. I don't regret staying loyal, even knowing how it ended, because my character doesn't shift based on someone else's behavior. I don't cheat because I'm angry. I don't entertain options because I'm bored. I don't step out because things feel heavy. If I'm unhappy, I leave. I don't betray, and that standard stays with me, not for her, for me. The scary part after betrayal is this: you start wondering if loyalty is even worth it, if everyone cheats eventually, if trusting deeply just makes you vulnerable. But I refuse to let someone else's lack of integrity change mine, because loyalty isn't outdated, it's rare. And rare doesn't mean foolish, it means valuable. She didn't stay loyal, but that says nothing about my worth. It says everything about her discipline, her boundaries, her emotional maturity. Because if someone can look at loyalty and still step outside it, they were never anchored. And I don't want someone who floats when things get tested. I want someone who stands. I stayed loyal, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was tempting not to, even when I felt underappreciated, and I'll stay that way. Not because everyone deserves it, but because I deserve to be someone who lives by principle. She didn't stay loyal, and that hurt, but I'd rather be the one who was solid than the one who couldn't hold a commitment. Because loyalty doesn't make you weak, it makes you rare, and one day someone will recognize that instead of testing it. Lust will ruin your life if you don't learn how to recognize it for what it really is. Not temptation, not desire, not even attraction. Lust is a signal. It's like a check engine light flashing on your dashboard, warning you that something deeper is wrong under the surface. And most people don't want to hear that. They'd rather numb it, feed it, distract themselves with it, instead of asking why it showed up in the first place. Because here's the truth: when lust starts controlling your thoughts, your habits, your attention, it usually means you're lacking something real in your life. Not sex, not validation, intimacy. And intimacy doesn't always mean romance. That's where a lot of people get it twisted. Intimacy can be connection, it can be purpose, it can be faith, it can be feeling seen by people who actually care about you. It can be having someone you can talk to honestly without pretending you're okay. When those things are missing, lust steps in as a cheap replacement. Gives you a temporary hit, a moment of feeling wanted, a moment of escape, but once that moment passes, you're left emptier than before. That's why lust never satisfies. It promises relief, but delivers restlessness. You indulge, and instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel more hollow, more disconnected, more frustrated with yourself. And then the cycle repeats, because you're not fixing the problem, you're feeding the symptom. The craving itself isn't the enemy, the lack of awareness is. Lust shows up when you're avoiding something, when you're lonely, when you're stressed, when you're disconnected from yourself. It's your mind trying to fill a void without doing the work, to understand why that void exists in the first place. And the more you indulge it without reflection, the more it delays your healing. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's normal, that everyone does it. But deep down, you know when something isn't sitting right with your spirit. You know when it's no longer about desire and more about escape. This isn't about shame, it's about honesty. Lust is an indicator, a warning sign. A moment where you need to pause and ask yourself, what am I really craving right now? Connection? Comfort? Meaning? Peace? Because until you figure that out, lust will keep pulling you further away from yourself instead of closer to who you're meant to be. Most people don't want to admit this part, but lust usually shows up when you're feeling empty, not when you're fulfilled, when your life feels aligned, when you're grounded, when you have purpose and connection. Lust doesn't scream as loud. It might knock, but it doesn't take over. It only takes control when there's space inside you that hasn't been filled with anything meaningful. That's why lust hits hardest late at night, when you're alone, when the noise dies down, and there's nothing left to distract you from your thoughts. That's when your mind starts looking for something, anything, to feel good for a moment, and lust offers that shortcut. No effort, no vulnerability, no risk of rejection, just instant stimulation. But shortcuts always come with a cost. The more you use lust as an escape, the harder it becomes to sit with yourself. You start avoiding silence, avoiding stillness, avoiding the questions you don't want to answer. You tell yourself you're just satisfying a desire, but really you're training your brain to seek relief instead of growth, comfort instead of clarity. And over time, that changes you. It dulls your motivation. It weakens your discipline. It distorts how you view people, turning them into objects instead of humans. It lowers your tolerance for real connection because real intimacy requires patience, presence, and effort. Things lust never asks of you. This is why people who live in lust often feel stuck, not because they're bad or weak, but because they're constantly numbing the very discomfort that could push them to grow. Pain becomes something to escape instead of something to understand, and healing gets postponed again and again. You have to learn to pause when the urge hits, not to fight it with shame, but to question it. Ask yourself what you're actually missing in that moment. Is it connection, purpose, rest, direction? Because the urge is information, and if you listen to it instead of obeying it, it can lead you to what actually needs attention in your life. Lust loses power the moment you become aware of it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable but important. Lust isn't just about what you want, it's about what you're avoiding. Most people don't struggle with lust because they're overly sexual. They struggle because they're disconnected from themselves, from their purpose, from real relationships, from meaning. When you don't feel fulfilled in your day-to-day life, your mind looks for stimulation, something intense enough to make you forget how empty things feel. Lust is powerful because it hijacks your attention. It pulls you out of the present moment and into fantasy. And fantasy is easier than reality. Fantasy doesn't ask you to change. Reality does. That's why lust becomes a habit, not because it feels good, but because it distracts you from feeling bad. It numbs loneliness, it masks insecurity, it gives you a false sense of control when everything else in your life feels uncertain. But every time you choose that escape, you reinforce the idea that you can't handle discomfort without running from it. And that slowly chips away at you. You start feeling weaker mentally, less disciplined, less confident. You promise yourself you'll stop, then you don't. And now it's not just lust anymore, it's guilt, shame, self-disappointment. You start questioning your self-control, your character, your ability to change, all because you never addressed the root issue in the first place. The problem isn't desire. Desire is human. The problem is unchanneled desire. Desire without direction turns into self-destruction. When your energy isn't going into building something meaningful, it leaks into things that drain you instead. This is why people who overcome lust don't just resist harder, they replace it, they build structure, they strengthen their spirit, they deepen their relationships, they find something worth committing to that gives them purpose beyond momentary pleasure. Lust thrives in isolation, in boredom, in lack of direction. But when your life has meaning, when your days are intentional, when your spirit feels aligned, lust doesn't have much room to grow. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops controlling you. Another reason lust has so much power is because it disguises itself as confidence. It makes you feel wanted, desired, in control. For a brief moment, it tricks you into thinking you're fulfilled. But once that moment fades, you're left with the same questions, the same restlessness, the same hollow feeling you were trying to escape in the first place. That's how you know it's not real fulfillment. Real fulfillment doesn't vanish the second the stimulation stops. Real fulfillment gives you peace afterward, not regret. Clarity, not confusion. strength, not self-disgust. And over time, if you're not careful, lust can start shaping how you view yourself. You begin to associate your worth with how desired you feel instead of who you actually are. You start needing validation just to feel okay. And when that validation isn't there, the craving comes back stronger, not because you're weak, but because your identity is being built on something unstable. This is where self-awareness becomes everything. You have to catch yourself and ask, what am I really avoiding right now? Am I running from loneliness, from boredom, from the work I know I need to do on myself? Lust often shows up when you're avoiding growth, when you're putting off healing, when you're ignoring parts of your life that need attention. The uncomfortable truth is that growth requires sitting with discomfort, requires stillness, silence, discipline, and lust offers you an easy way out of that process. But every time you take that exit, you delay becoming the version of yourself you know you're capable of being. You don't have to be perfect. You're going to slip. You're going to struggle. That's part of being human. What matters is whether you're conscious of the pattern or blindly repeating it. Awareness alone starts breaking the cycle, because the goal isn't to eliminate desire. Desire is natural. The goal is to stop letting desire control you, to stop letting it dictate your habits, your focus, and your future. When you do that, you don't lose pleasure, you gain freedom. Here's where things start to shift if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding becoming. Every time you give in without thinking, you're choosing comfort over growth. And that choice, repeated enough times, slowly shapes the direction of your life. You start delaying things you know you should be doing. Goals get pushed back, discipline weakens, motivation fades, not all at once, but subtly. You tell yourself you'll lock in tomorrow, you'll change next week, you'll get serious later. But later keeps moving, and you stay stuck in the same patterns, wondering why nothing feels different. And the worst part? Lust makes you numb to it. It gives you just enough relief to tolerate a life you know you're not fully proud of. It lowers the urgency to change, because why face the discomfort of growth when you can distract yourself instead? This is why so many people feel lost, not because they lack potential, but because they keep trading long-term fulfillment for short-term relief. And relief is never the same as peace. Relief fades, peace stays. When you start addressing the real voids in your life, lust starts losing its grip naturally. When you build structure into your days, when you commit to something bigger than yourself, when you start respecting your time, your body, your mind, when you develop a relationship with God, purpose, or discipline, whatever grounds you, lust doesn't hit as hard, because now you have something to protect. You realize your energy is valuable, your attention is valuable, and not everything deserves access to you. You stop feeding impulses that don't align with the future you're trying to build, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself. That's when lust stops feeling like a battle, it starts feeling like a signal. A reminder to check in with yourself, to ask, am I aligned right now? Or am I avoiding something I need to face? And every time you choose alignment over impulse, you get a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more in control. At this stage, you start realizing something important. Lust was never the root problem, it was the symptom. The real issue was disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from purpose, from meaning, from the version of you that feels grounded and whole. Once you see that, the urge loses some of its mystery. It's no longer this uncontrollable force, it's just information. You begin to notice patterns. The urges come when you're tired, when you're bored, when you feel unaccomplished at the end of the day, when you avoided something you know you should have handled, and instead of judging yourself for it, you start listening. You ask, what am I missing right now? Rest, direction, fulfillment, human connection. This is where growth actually happens. When you suppress desire, but when you replace it. When you choose to build instead of escape. When you put energy into things that give back instead of drain you. Working on your body, your craft, your faith, your friendships. Things that leave you stronger afterward, not emptier. And the crazy part is, the more you do this, the quieter lust becomes. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer needed to cope. You're not running from yourself anymore. You're becoming someone you respect. You start carrying yourself differently. Your confidence becomes real, not borrowed from temporary validation. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. You feel solid just being present, just being disciplined, just knowing you're moving in the right direction even when it's uncomfortable. That's when self-control stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like freedom. Freedom from compulsions, freedom from regret, freedom from waking up feeling disappointed in yourself. You're no longer controlled by every urge that passes through your mind. You won't be perfect. Nobody is, but you'll be conscious, and consciousness changes everything. Because once you're aware, you get to choose, and choosing growth over impulse again and again is how you reclaim your life. There's a moment where you finally understand that discipline isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about choosing a better one, a deeper one. The kind that doesn't disappear the second the screen goes dark or the urge passes, the kind that stays with you when you're alone with your thoughts and you can actually respect the person staring back at you. You start realizing how much time and energy you were leaking, hours, focus, mental clarity, all going towards something that never loved you back, never built you up, never moved your life forward. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to unsee it. You begin protecting your mind the same way you'd protect your body. You stop feeding it things that weaken it. Now, this is where restraint becomes self-respect. You're no longer saying no because you're scared. You're saying no because you finally understand the cost of saying yes. You've felt the emptiness after. You've lived the fog. You've experienced how indulging too much slowly disconnects you from your ambition, your relationships, your purpose. And something else changes too. You start seeing people differently, not as objects, not as outlets, but as humans again, with depth, with emotion, with stories. Real connection stops feeling boring. It starts feeling rare, valuable, something worth protecting instead of rushing. That's when intimacy starts to return in healthier forms, real conversations, genuine friendships, moments of stillness that don't need to be filled, a sense of closeness with yourself that you didn't even realize you were missing. And once you taste that, lust loses its grip even more because now you're building something, a life you don't need to escape from, a version of yourself you're proud of. When that happens, the urge doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. It passes like a thought, like a wave. At the end of the day, lust only has power when you don't understand it. When you finally see it for what it is, a signal, not a solution, it stops running your life. You stop treating it like something you must obey and start treating it like something you observe, and that shift changes everything. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be disciplined. You just need to be honest. Honest about what you're missing, honest about what you're avoiding, honest about who you want to become, because every urge is an invitation, not to indulge, but to check in. Once you start responding instead of reacting, you regain control. You stop letting momentary desire dictate long-term direction. You stop trading peace for pleasure. You stop delaying your growth for comfort, and slowly, your life begins to align with the values you claim to have. Lust didn't ruin you. It revealed the places where healing was needed, the moments where connection was missing, the areas of your life that needed structure, purpose, and depth. And once you start filling those spaces intentionally, lust no longer screams for attention. It fades into the background. You become more present, more focused, more grounded. You don't feel constantly pulled in 100 directions anymore. You know what matters, you know what doesn't, and you act accordingly. This isn't about becoming cold or denying desire. It's about mastering yourself, about building a life where your mind works for you, not against you, where your choices reflect your values, where you don't need escape because you're finally moving towards something real. And when you get there, you'll look back and realize something important. The urge was never the enemy. Ignoring the message was. I don't think I've ever been someone's first choice. Not immediately. Not without hesitation. I've been liked, wanted, texted every day. But when it came down to it, there was always a pause. Let me think. I'm not sure what I want. The timing isn't right, and you start noticing a pattern. You're good enough to keep around, good enough to talk to, good enough to feel close to, but not good enough to be picked without doubt, and that does something to you, because you don't want to compete. You don't want to prove yourself. You don't want to convince someone to see what's already there. You just want one person who doesn't hesitate, one person who doesn't compare you, doesn't explore other options, doesn't need to figure it out, just chooses you. And when that hasn't happened yet, the question creeps in quietly. Is there something about me that makes people unsure? When you're never the first choice, you start overperforming. You become extra understanding, extra patient, extra available, you respond faster, you give more reassurance, you try to be easier to love, because maybe if you're perfect enough, they won't hesitate. Maybe if you don't complain, don't ask for too much, don't pressure them, they'll finally pick you confidently. So you adjust, you downplay your needs, you accept the bare minimum, you tell yourself you're just being mature, but really, you're trying to secure a spot, you're trying to prove that you're worth choosing. And the painful part is this: even when you give your best, even when you're thoughtful, loyal, consistent, they still hesitate, and that's when it hits. It was never about you not doing enough. It was about them not being sure. and no amount of overperforming can fix someone else's uncertainty. After a while, it stops feeling like coincidence. It starts feeling like proof. Proof that maybe you're missing something, that maybe there's a quality you don't have, that maybe you're just almost exciting enough, almost attractive enough, almost unforgettable. And when you sit with that long enough, it begins to chip at your confidence. You start comparing yourself to the people they did choose. What do they have that I don't? What do they do differently? Why was it easier to commit to them? And the dangerous part, you begin to rewrite yourself in your head. Maybe I'm too available, too soft, too deep, or maybe not enough of something else. So you question your personality, your timing, your worth. But here's the truth that hurts before it heals. Someone else's preference is not a measurement of your value. You can be incredible and still not be someone's first choice. Not because you're lacking, but because alignment isn't forced. And just because someone didn't see you, clearly doesn't mean you weren't clear. It just means they weren't your person. At some point you get tired, not bitter, not angry, just tired. Tired of feeling like you're competing without signing up for a competition. Tired of being compared to other options. Tired of waiting for someone to decide. Tired of proving you're worth choosing. And something shifts. You stop trying to outshine anyone. You stop adjusting yourself to win. You stop playing it cool just to stay in the running. Because love isn't supposed to feel like auditions. You shouldn't have to outperform someone to be valued. You shouldn't have to worry about whether you're the best option available. You either align or you don't. And once you realize that, you stop competing. You don't fight for a spot. You don't beg to be prioritized. You don't argue your value. You just observe. If someone's unsure, that's your answer. Not because you're not enough, but because you refuse to be an option. And the moment you stop competing, you stop feeling small because you remember something important. You're not here to be the best choice in a lineup. You're here to be the only choice for the right person. The moment you refuse to compete, your standards rise automatically. You stop accepting, let's see where this goes. You stop entertaining mixed signals. You stop tolerating being someone's backup plan. Because if someone has to compare you, they're not aligned with you. It's that simple. You don't need to be better than anyone else. You don't need to win. You don't need to outperform. You just need someone who sees you and doesn't hesitate. And once you decide you're no longer an option, you start moving differently. You don't over-explain. You don't overgive. You don't overstay. If someone's energy feels unsure, you don't chase clarity, you step back, not to play games, not to test them, but because you value yourself enough to not beg for certainty. And here's the truth. The right person won't need alternatives. They won't weigh you against other options. They won't keep you around while exploring. They'll know. And when you finally believe you deserve that kind of clarity, you stop asking, why am I never the first choice? Because you realize you were just giving your energy to people who weren't capable of choosing fully. Being someone's second option was never your identity. It was a season, a pattern you tolerated, a dynamic you accepted, a lesson you hadn't learned yet, but it was never who you are. You weren't born to compete for attention. You weren't designed to be compared. You weren't meant to sit around waiting for someone to decide if you're enough. That was just a chapter, and chapters end. What you thought was rejection was actually redirection. Because imagine being fully chosen by someone who had to debate it. Imagine building something with someone who once hesitated. That foundation would always feel shaky. So maybe not being first protected you from being second in someone's heart. Maybe every time someone paused, it was life removing you from something that wasn't certain. You weren't overlooked, you were misaligned. And misalignment isn't failure, it's filtering. You're not destined to be the second option. You were just learning what it feels like, so you'd never accept it again. Everything changes when you stop identifying as the almost. You stop saying, this always happens to me. You stop expecting to be overlooked. Stop bracing for hesitation. Stop assuming you'll be compared. Because when you carry the identity of being second, You unconsciously accept second-place behavior. You tolerate inconsistency. You excuse uncertainty. You stay longer than you should. But the moment you decide that's not who you are, your tolerance drops. You don't romanticize mixed signals. You don't wait around for someone to decide. You don't attach yourself to potential. You start moving like someone who expects clarity, and that energy is different. You ask direct questions. You communicate directly. You walk away directly, not because you're cold, because you're done being confused. You're not almost. You're not maybe. You're not will see. You're either fully chosen or you're unavailable. And once you internalize that, the pattern breaks because you no longer accept roles that don't fit you. Being someone's first choice starts with being confident enough to walk away. Because if you're afraid to lose them, you'll accept almost. You'll accept, I'm not ready. You'll accept, I need time. You'll accept being kept around while they figure it out. Not because you're weak, but because you don't want to lose the connection. But here's the shift. The moment you realize you're okay walking away, you stop settling for hesitation. You stop clinging to potential. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop staying where you feel unsure. And that energy changes everything. You don't threaten to leave. You don't play games. You just won't stay where you're not certain. And when someone feels that, they either step up or they step out. Both are clarity, because being someone's first choice isn't about demanding it. It's about being willing to lose anything that doesn't offer it. And once you're strong enough to walk away from confusion, you stop ending up in it. The right person won't make you question your position. You won't have to decode their text. You won't have to wonder where you stand. You won't have to compete with silence. When someone is sure about you, it shows in consistency, in effort, in how they talk about you, in how they prioritize you. There's no gray area, and that's what you've been missing. Not love, not attraction, not chemistry, clarity. Because every time you felt like you weren't the first choice, it wasn't because you lacked something, it was because the situation lacked certainty. The right connection won't feel like a tryout. It won't feel like you're waiting for results. It won't feel like you're one option among many. It will feel stable, secure, intentional. And when you experience that, you'll realize something important. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. So why was I never the first choice? The truth, because I was entertaining people who weren't capable of choosing fully. It was never about my worth, never about me lacking something. Never about me being second best. It was about alignment. I was trying to be first in rooms where I was only an option. And once I stopped accepting that role, everything changed. I don't compete anymore. I don't overperform. I don't wait to be picked. If someone hesitates, I step back. If someone compares, I remove myself. If someone isn't sure, I let them find certainty somewhere else. Because I finally understand something. The right person won't struggle to choose me. They won't need alternatives. They won't need time to decide if I'm enough. They won't treat me like a possibility. They'll treat me like a decision. And until that shows up, I'm not missing out. I'm filtering. So I'm done asking, why am I never the first choice? Now the question is simpler. If I'm not your first choice, why are you still an option for me? And that's the shift. Don't waste your teenage years obsessing over love. It's easy to fall into that trap. You watch movies, shows, social media, high school sweethearts, perfect relationships, young love that looks magical from the outside. So you start thinking you need that too. Like if you don't experience love early, you're missing out on something important. So you chase it. You talk to people just to not be alone. You stay in situations that don't feel right just so you can say you're with someone. You keep trying to make things work that clearly aren't working, and slowly, without realizing it, it starts tearing you down. Your confidence drops, your sense of self gets blurry, you stop knowing who you are outside of liking someone or wanting to be liked back. Your mood depends on replies, attention, validation, and that's dangerous at that age. When you're young, you're not supposed to have everything figured out. You're supposed to be discovering who you are, what you like, what you stand for, what kind of person you want to become. But when all your energy goes into chasing relationships, you neglect that part of yourself. You start building your identity around other people instead of building it from within. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most teenage relationships don't last, not because you did something wrong, not because love isn't real, but because you're both still growing, still changing, still figuring life out, and forcing love before you even know yourself is like trying to build something on an unstable foundation. It cracks every time. If something isn't flowing naturally, stop forcing it. Love isn't supposed to feel like constant stress, chasing, or proving your worth. If it's meant to happen, it won't require you to lose yourself to keep it. And the thing nobody wants to hear? Desperation pushes people away. Confidence attracts them. When you stop hunting for love and start working on yourself, things shift. You become more grounded, more secure, more you. And that's when real connections show up naturally. You still have so much life ahead of you, so much fun to have, so many experiences that don't revolve around relationships. Don't let anxiety over love rob you of your youth. Love will come, but it shouldn't come at the cost of who you are. Right now, the most important relationship you can build is the one with yourself. Here's what happens when you slow down and stop chasing love so hard. You start hearing yourself again, your own thoughts, your own wants. You realize how much noise you were living with, always wondering if someone liked you back, always questioning where you stood, always trying to be enough for someone who barely knew who they were either. When you're young, your heart is open, but your identity is still forming. That's a dangerous mix. You attach quickly because you don't yet have roots in yourself. So when something ends, it doesn't just hurt, it shakes your entire sense of worth. You don't just lose a person, you lose who you thought you were with them. That's why breakups feel world-ending at that age. Not because the love was deeper, but because you were still becoming you. And every time something falls apart, you start questioning yourself instead of realizing it was just part of growth. When you step back from chasing relationships, you give yourself room to breathe. Room to build confidence that isn't dependent on attention. Room to develop interests, skills, goals. Room to fail at things that don't involve your heart breaking. And those failures, they teach you way more than forcing a relationship ever could. You also learn how to be alone without feeling lonely. That's huge, because once you can enjoy your own company, you stop settling for people who treat you like an option. You stop forcing conversations. You stop chasing mixed signals. You start choosing peace over drama, and the wild part is, once you stop looking desperate for love, you become more attractive without trying, not because you change your appearance, but because you carry yourself differently. You're not reaching for validation anymore. You're grounded, you're present, you're whole on your own. Love hits different when it finds you like that. When it comes from alignment instead of need, when it adds to your life instead of becoming your life. So don't rush it, don't force it, don't let relationships define you before you even know yourself. There's no prize for loving early, but there is power in loving wisely. Here's what happens when you slow down and stop chasing love so hard. You start hearing yourself again, your own thoughts, your own wants. You realize how much noise you were living with, always wondering if someone liked you back, always questioning where you stood, always trying to be enough for someone who barely knew who they were either. When you're young, your heart is open, but your identity is still forming. That's a dangerous mix. You attach quickly because you don't yet have roots in yourself. So when something ends, it doesn't just hurt, it shakes your entire sense of worth. You don't just lose a person, you lose who you thought you were with them. That's why breakups feel world-ending at that age. Not because the love was deeper, but because you were still becoming you. And every time something falls apart, you start questioning yourself instead of realizing it was just part of growth. When you step back from chasing relationships, you give yourself room to breathe, room to build confidence that isn't dependent on attention, room to develop interests, skills, goals, room to fail at things that don't involve your heart breaking, and those failures, they teach you way more than forcing a relationship ever could. You also learn how to be alone without feeling lonely. That's huge, because once you can enjoy your own company, you You stop settling for people who treat you like an option. You stop forcing conversations. You stop chasing mixed signals. You start choosing peace over drama. And the wild part is, once you stop looking desperate for love, you become more attractive without trying. Not because you changed your appearance, but because you carry yourself differently. You're not reaching for validation anymore. You're grounded, you're present, you're whole on your own. Love hits different when it finds you like that, when it comes from alignment instead of need, when it adds to your life instead of becoming your life. So don't rush it, don't force it, don't let relationships define you before you even know yourself. There's no prize for loving early, but there is power in loving wisely. The truth is, love isn't something you're late to. There's no deadline where if you don't find it by a certain age you've failed. That pressure is made up. It comes from comparison, from watching other people's highlights and assuming they're ahead of you, but everyone's path is different, and forcing yourself to keep up only makes you miss what's right in front of you. When you focus on yourself first, something happens. You stop romanticizing every connection. You stop projecting futures onto people who haven't even earned a place in your present. You start asking better questions, not just, do they like me? And do I even like how I feel around? That shift changes everything. You realize that love shouldn't drain you. It shouldn't make you anxious all the time. It shouldn't make you abandon your goals, your friendships, or your sense of direction. Real love fits into your life, it doesn't consume it. And you can't recognize that until you've spent time building a life you actually care about. This is also when you learn patience. Not the kind where you wait around hoping someone chooses you, but the kind where you trust that what's meant for you won't require you to chase it down. You stop running toward people and start walking toward yourself. And ironically, that's when people start noticing you more. Because confidence isn't loud. It's calm. It's knowing you're okay whether someone stays or goes. It's choosing people who choose you back without hesitation. And that kind of energy doesn't come from trying to be loved. It comes from being at peace with who you are. So don't rush love. Don't let loneliness make your decision. Don't let movies or social media convince you you're behind. You're not behind. You're building. And when love does show up, real love, you'll be ready for it, not desperate for it. One day you'll look back and realize how important this time was. Not because of who you dated or didn't date, but because of who you became when no one was choosing you romantically. These are the years where you learn discipline, where you learn how to sit with discomfort instead of running to someone to distract you from it, where you learn how to build something that lasts longer than a temporary connection. When you stop making love the center of your world, you start seeing everything else clearly. Your friendships get stronger, your goals feel more meaningful, your confidence comes from progress, not attention, and you realize how dangerous it is to let someone else be the source of your happiness before you even know how to create it yourself. This is also when you start setting standards instead of expectations. Expectations are hoping someone becomes what you want. Standards are knowing what you will and won't accept. And standards only come from self-respect. You don't develop that by chasing validation. You develop it by choosing yourself consistently. There's a version of you that exists when you're not worried about being loved. That version is focused, curious, hungry for growth. That version doesn't beg to be chosen because he knows his value isn't determined by who stays. And that's the version of you that real love is actually drawn to. So let love be something that complements your life, not something that defines. Let relationships come from alignment, not loneliness. And trust that when the timing is right, when you're solid in who you are, love won't feel like something you have to chase. It'll feel like something that finally makes sense. You're not missing out, you're preparing. What people don't talk about enough is how much damage comes from learning love the wrong way too early. When you grow up thinking love is supposed to be chaotic, unstable, and uncertain, you carry that blueprint into adulthood. You start associating butterflies with anxiety. You mistake emotional inconsistency for passion. and you end up chasing people who mirror the same confusion you never heal. That's why taking time for yourself isn't selfish. It's preventative. It teaches you how to recognize healthy connection when it finally appears. Because healthy love doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't feel like you're constantly auditioning to be chosen. When you build yourself first, you stop trying to earn love. You expect it to be mutual. You expect effort to be consistent. You expect respect to be automatic. And if it's not there, you walk away without turning it into a personal failure. You also learn how to love without losing yourself. You keep your routines, your goals, your sense of direction. Love becomes something that adds warmth to your life, not something that replaces. And that balance is something you can only learn when you've spent time standing on your own. The biggest mistake isn't being alone when you're young. The mistake is tying your self-worth to relationships before you understand who you are without. You don't need someone to complete you. You need to complete yourself enough that love becomes a choice, not a necessity. So let yourself grow. Let yourself evolve without pressure. Let love meet you when you're ready to share your love, not escape. Because the strongest love stories don't start with desperation. They start with self-respect. Eventually, you reach a point where you realize how quiet confidence actually feels. It's not loud, it's not flexing, it's not proving anything to anyone, it's waking up knowing, even if no one texts you today, you're still okay, that your life still has direction, that your worth didn't disappear because someone didn't choose you. That's the version of you love is meant to meet. When you're young, it's easy to think love will save you, that once you find the right person, everything else will fall into place. But real growth teaches you the opposite. You build the life first, you build stability, purpose, discipline, and self-respect. And then love fits into that life naturally instead of becoming the thing you rely on to feel whole. This is why rushing relationships too early can stunt you. You start making decisions based on fear of losing someone instead of what's best for your future. You compromise your goal. You stay small to keep someone comfortable, and you don't even realize it's happening until you look back and feel behind. Taking time for yourself isn't missing. It's an investment. Every day you spend learning who you are, strengthening your mind, improving your habits, and building something meaningful is setting you up for a healthier connection later. One where love doesn't feel like pressure, but partnership. And when that love finally comes, you won't feel like you're holding your breath. You won't feel anxious or unsure. You'll feel steady, chosen, at peace. That's how you'll know you didn't rush. One day, love will find you when you're not looking for it. Not because you gave up on it, but because you stopped needing it to validate you. You'll meet someone when you're comfortable in your own skin, when your life already has meaning, and when you're not trying to fill a void with another person. And when that happens, it won't feel like chaos. It won't feel like chasing or guessing or proving. It'll feel natural, balanced, safe, like two people choosing each other, not out of loneliness, but out of intention. You'll be glad you didn't rush. You'll be grateful for the nights you spent alone building yourself instead of forcing something that would have only distracted. You'll realize that the love you were searching for externally was something you were always meant to cultivate internally first. So if you're young and feeling behind, if you're single and feeling pressured, breathe. If you're watching everyone else pair up and wondering when it'll be your turn, trust the timing. Love isn't a race. And your life isn't measured by who you dated in your teens. Protect your peace, build your... Enjoy being young. The rest will... You know what actually hurts? Wanting to be in love, but realizing you can't stay in it. You finally meet someone good. They're kind. They're loyal. They care about you in a way that feels real. On paper, they're everything you're supposed to want. And for a moment you think, maybe this is it. But then they like you back. And something in you shuts off. Not slowly, not gently. It's like the feeling disappears overnight. You try to force it. You tell yourself to be grateful. You try to match their energy, their effort, their love, but instead of growing closer, you start pulling away. You notice flaws that didn't bother you before. You get irritated over small things. You find reasons to create distance, and suddenly you're the problem. On the outside, it looks like you're sabotaging something good, like you're avoiding someone who treats you right. But inside, it feels worse than that. It feels suffocating, because even when you try to stay, it feels like you're trapped in something you can't feel the way you're supposed to. The messed up part, you still care. Somewhere deep down, you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to be cold. You don't want to be the reason someone feels unwanted, but you also don't know how to love them without losing yourself. And that kind of conflict turns love into guilt. What's confusing about this feeling is that it only shows up with the right kind of person, not the chaotic ones, not the ones who make you anxious, not the ones who disappear and keep you guessing. It happens with the ones who are steady, the ones who reply, who show up, who don't play games with your emotions, and instead of feeling safe, your body reacts like something's wrong. You don't feel excitement, you feel pressure, not because they're asking for too much, but because they're offering consistency, and you don't know how to relax inside it. There's no chase, no uncertainty, no emotional roller coaster to distract you. So your mind starts searching for escape routes. You tell yourself you're bored, that the spark is gone, that something feels off, and even if you can't explain why. But deep down, it's not disinterest, it's unfamiliarity, because when you're used to love being unstable, peace can feel empty. And when you're used to earning affection, being chosen freely can feel undeserved. So instead of leaning in, you pull away, you create distance so you can breathe again, not because they're hurting you, but because closeness is touching something unhealed. And that's the part nobody prepares you for. Sometimes the problem isn't that you don't want love, it's that you've never learned how to stay when love doesn't hurt. At some point, this starts to mess with how you see yourself, because now you're not just confused, you're guilty. You look at them and think, yeah, they didn't do anything wrong. They're patient, they're kind, they're trying, and you're the one pulling back. So you start labeling yourself cold, broken, unappreciative, the person who ruins good things. From the outside, it looks simple. Why would you walk away from someone who treats you right? But what they don't see is how trapped you feel inside the expectation to feel something you can't force. You don't hate them. You hate the pressure to become the version of yourself that knows how to stay. So instead of being honest, you distance yourself, you reply slower, you stop initiating. You hope they'll lose interest so you don't have to explain yourself. And that's the part that hurts the most, not losing them, hurting someone who didn't deserve it. You carry that with you. The knowledge that somewhere someone is wondering what they did wrong, when the truth is, you just didn't know how to receive what they were offering. And that realization sits heavy, because wanting love but not knowing how to hold it feels like a flaw you can't explain, only live with. Avoidance doesn't come from not caring. It comes from caring too much and not knowing how to say it. Because how do you explain something like this without sounding cruel? How do you tell someone, you're good to me, but I don't feel what I'm supposed to feel? There's no gentle way to say that. So instead of explaining, you disappear emotionally. You convince yourself silence is kinder. That distance will hurt less than honesty, but silence creates its own kind of damage. They feel it, the shift, the hesitation, the way your energy isn't the same anymore, and you feel it too. Every message feels heavier. Every interaction feels like a reminder that you're failing at something that should be simple, so you keep avoiding the conversation, hoping clarity will show up on its own, but it doesn't. All that grows is resentment, not toward them, but toward yourself, because now you're stuck between two fears, hurting them by telling the truth, or hurting them slowly by pulling away. And avoidance feels safer in the moment because it delays the guilt, but it doesn't remove it, it just stretches it out. And the longer you stay quiet, the harder it becomes to speak honestly at all. If you look closer, this pattern isn't about them at all. It's about what closeness brings up in you, because real healthy affection doesn't distract you from yourself. It brings you face to face with things you buried, old fears, old wounds, old beliefs about what love costs. When someone is consistent, there's nowhere to hide. You can't blame mixed signals, you can't blame distance, you can't blame uncertainty. All that's left is you, and the part of you that learned early on that love comes with pressure. Pressure to be enough, pressure to stay, pressure to not mess it up. So your system does what it learned to do best. It pulls away before it can fail. Avoidance isn't rejection, it's self-protection. You're not running from them. You're running from the version of yourself that feels exposed when someone chooses you fully, because being wanted means being seen. And being seen means being vulnerable in ways you never learned were safe. So your mind flips the switch. You call it disinterest, you call it boredom, you call it not feeling it, but underneath all of that is fear, not of losing them, but of losing control. Eventually a realization starts to creep in. This isn't about love failing, it's about healing that hasn't happened yet. Because when someone offers you something real, it presses on the places you never finished healing, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because closeness exposes what avoidance kept quiet. Love asks questions you've been dodging. It asks you to be present. It asks you to trust consistency. It asks you to stay when things feel uncomfortable instead of dramatic. And if your past taught you that love comes with loss, your body reacts before your mind can explain it. So instead of leaning in, you shut down, not because you don't care, but because caring activates fear, fear of dependency, fear of responsibility, fear of becoming someone who needs another person, because somewhere along the way, you learned that needing someone meant giving them the power to hurt you. So when love shows up calm and steady, your nervous system mistakes it for danger, and you don't realize what's happening until later, after you've already pulled away, after you've already created distance, after you've already blamed yourself. But this moment matters because once you see that this isn't disinterest, it's unhealed fear, you stop calling yourself broken, you start calling it what it is, a signal. Once you see the pattern, something changes, not overnight, not perfectly, but you stop running on autopilot. You start noticing the moment your body wants to pull away, the urge to detach, the instinct to create distance the second things feel real, and instead of obeying it immediately, you pause. You ask yourself, am I actually uninterested, or am I uncomfortable? That question alone changes everything, because discomfort isn't a red flag, it's a signal. It tells you something important is happening, something unfamiliar, something that requires presence instead of escape. So instead of disappearing, you stay a little longer. You don't force feelings, you don't fake certainty. You just allow yourself to exist inside the discomfort without punishing it. You start choosing honesty over avoidance, not brutal honesty, gentle honesty. I'm confused, I'm scared, I don't know what I'm feeling yet. And for the first time, connection doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like practice. Practice staying, practice communicating, practice letting someone see you without immediately taking that away. You realize something important here. You don't have to feel everything at once. You don't have to be sure. You just have to stop abandoning yourself the moment love asks you to be present. At the end of all this, you start to understand something clearly. Love was never the problem. Fear was. Fear was the thing turning care into pressure. Fear was the thing making peace feel boring. Fear was the thing convincing you that pulling away was safer than staying. When fear stops leading, love feels different. It's quieter, slower, less dramatic. It doesn't hit like chaos. It doesn't demand certainty right away. It doesn't make you feel trapped. It gives you space to exist without disappearing. Real love doesn't ask you to force feelings. It doesn't punish confusion. It doesn't make you feel like you're failing for needing time. It lets you grow into it, and when you stop running, you realize something important. Caring doesn't mean losing yourself. Staying doesn't mean being stuck. And choosing someone doesn't mean giving up control. It just means you're present. You're allowed to learn how to love differently than you were taught. You're allowed to take it slow. You're allowed to feel unsure without self-sabotaging. And most of all, you're allowed to stop hating yourself for struggling with something you were never shown how to do safely, because the moment love stops being about fear is the moment it finally starts feeling real.